Okay, so 1.5 years since the last video and almost 300,000 views. I think it's time for the next masterclass. As you can probably imagine, a video like this takes a lot of time and energy, so I think that's why I've been putting it off for such a long time. But I thought it was about time because Blender 4.4, Blender 4.3, and maybe Blender even 4.2 or 4.1 has been out since the last masterclass. It's been a long time. And since then, there has been new changes in techniques, new updates, new features, which need to be talked about. I mean, this is the 3-hour-long video, 3 hours of free tutorial. So if you want to start ArcViz, or if you have any interest at all, you're probably in a good place to give this a shot. This scene, I will upload the whole thing to iMesh. So we've recently radicalized our pricing as well. So $17 per month, full unlimited access. You can download the whole entire library. We now have an add-on inside of Blender, so you can just download directly inside of Blender, 2,500 assets. We also have 9 other scenes, which are already uploaded to iMesh. So if you don't know where to start in your ArcViz journey, downloading and dissecting these scenes is probably one of the best things you can do. I think that's everything you need to know. I do recommend you do have some basic knowledge inside of Blender. We do have a beginner-friendly course on our channel as well. There's 10 separate modules, all free on YouTube. So if you want to learn how to navigate around the scene, how to create something quite interesting, then do check out that course. I'll put a link in the description as well. But just follow along and see where you get up to. And if you have any questions, just write a comment in the comment section, or jump onto our Discord channel and reach out to us there. So good luck, and I'll see you guys on the other side. Okay, so let's jump straight in. I actually have just one small tip to start with. I'd recommend getting a tape measure. If you're getting into ArcViz, it's super useful to figure out how big items are and how big they should be, because sometimes you add an item and you think, that's not quite right, and you have to just double check. So a tape measure, I'd highly recommend. Right then, so how do we start? So first of all, you'll probably have a floor plan like this. You'll probably get it from an architect, and it'll probably arrive as curves. If you did get them, you can convert them all to an object, and then you can just extrude these if you wanted to. However, I'd recommend actually tracing your own version anyway, because in some cases, when an architect is using AutoCAD, for example, and they try to make sure that lines line up, sometimes the snapping actually snaps to elements not quite on the corner, but from the architect's point of view, as accurate as they try to be, there will always be missed corners, so they won't quite make it match. So if you extrude these faces, you might end up with gaps. So it's best to trace your own version anyway. So to do that, I'm going to go to Edit, Preferences, and search for Extra Objects. That one here. And while I'm here, actually, let's also get Loop Tools, make sure that this one is installed as well. So with extra objects, I can then click anywhere on the screen, do Shift A, I can add a mesh, I can add single vert and add single vert. So now we're straight in edit mode with make sure you're on vertex select. I'm going to press Shift and Tab, and that has now enabled snapping, but I'm going to make sure it's set to vertex. And then all I need to do is just bring it over to a start point, something like this. So as we can see here, there is a gap. So I'm going to do E and then X and extrude that until it snaps to this edge, and then I can work my way around. So I'm literally just going to trace this to go around. So press E and Y. I'm always going to be pressing either X or Y to make sure that it is actually snapped to that direction, because like I said, they might have a moment in which the architect has tried to snap it to a certain element and the line is just not quite straight. So that would be incorrect. Especially when it's not quite straight and then there's a gap and then this wall starts here. So you can safely presume that it's probably going to be a perfectly straight line. So let's do E and then X, E, Y, E, X, and just work our way around. Okay, now we're here. I'm going to do E and then X, extrude out. So this is basically going to be the outside wall. So when you look at it from this direction, you'll see that wall. And then I'm going to do Shift D, X, bring that over to here, and then EX. And then work my way back round. So EY, EX, EY. And now for this is like the archway. So I'm just going to leave this vertex here, and then we can extrude it in a second. EY and EY again. Again, I'm just adding extra vertices because this is going to be for the step. So having the geometry already there is going to be quite helpful when we want to extrude a little bit later. So I'm going to press EY. This is going to be the door frame. So I'm just going to go around that, and we can extrude that in a second. EX. And then I'm going to select the last one and press F. And like I said, it might not be 100% straight. We don't necessarily know that they had that completely straight. although it's not 100% necessary, I'm just going to do SX0 anyway to make sure it is straight. And then what we have here is the basic room shape. So next I'm just going to duplicate this, Shift D, EX, EY, EX, and select these ones. And again, scale it on the X-axis. And we have the swimming pool here, but we can get onto that a little bit later. So now we have the basic room shape created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate this one from the outside area. Control L, P, separate that. So now we have this basic room shape created. So what I'm going to do is press E and then Z and then press 3.05. I believe that was about the height of my room in the end. And as we can see here, in my particular case, we can actually see through here. And that's because I have a back face culling turned on. And I can turn that back off again so we can actually see something like this, because I believe this will be turned on by default and your room might look something like this. And that's because it's trying to calculate which direction the normals should be going. But I want, as we're going to be inside the room, I want the normals to be on the other side. So I'm going to press A and then Shift N. And it's going to recalculate all the normals, and it might look something like this. If it ends up looking something like this, where all the red is on the inside, all you need to do is Alt N and flip that background. So now we have that room shape there. So next, what I'm going to do is to create the floor. So all I'm going to do is hold down Alt, click on the bottom, and I'm just going to deselect these. So I just press C to get this brush, hold down Shift, and I could just turn those off. And then I'm going to do Shift D, Enter P, and then I can click on the floor, and then I can just press F. So next, what we need to do is that there is actually a step here. And because we already created these vertices, what I can do is just join these up, press J. I can select this face and then press E. And if it hasn't snapped to the Z axis, but it should do, just press Z and make sure this line is here, and then press 0.15, and that's going to be 15 centimeters. If I press // on the number pad, I can go into local view, and it has actually created all this extra geometry around the edge, which I don't necessarily need. I only need this front step here. So I'm going to press X and delete those faces there. So now we have the floor. So if we go back into the scene, we can have a look around here. So we can see that the step is now created and all the other elements are working fine. So next thing we want to do is also create the ceiling. It's going to be the same thing. So let's just select all of these. And I can just press F to do that. So like I said earlier, I had backface culling turned on because when you're working in a room, especially when it's quite a small room, you want to be able to see into the room. You can press N, go to view and change the focal length. So something like 30 or something allows you to be inside the room. If it's quite high, it's going to be a little bit hard to navigate around and see what's actually in there. So let's just go to 30. But what I'm going to do now is also go to here and turn off back face culling, and that allows us to see into the room nice and easy. So next, let's create this floor outside. So we do have this geometry already created, and as there is also a step, I'm going to press G, Z, and snap it to this part. And then in edit mode, I'm just going to press F to fill that in. And now we can also create the swimming pool. We can see it's actually gone see-through because the face is on the wrong side. So I'm just going to press Alt N and flip that round. So let's create some geometry for the swimming pool. And with snapping always enabled, allows us to quickly do this. I can select this edge, and this is going to be basically the rim of the swimming pool. So I can press E, 0.1, and then enter, and then I, and 0.1 to inset, and then EZ, Z 0.65 minus. There we go. So now we have this basic swimming pool shape as well. And for these outside walls, these are actually going to be 1 meter high. So I'm just going to select these. I'm going to press Shift D, enter, then P to separate. And what we've got left is going to be this outside wall element. I'm going to press Tab to go into edit mode and press A, E, Z, 1. So a lot of shortcut keys in this. I do think that you should absolutely be learning these shortcut keys from day one, because it's incredibly important and speeds up your workflow considerably. But hopefully the screencast keys here can help. So press A, and then I'm going to flip these back around again and do Alt N and flip. So now we can see the wall has been created. As this was made from this geometry, we can see it does actually have extra edges here. But as this is going to be an independent element, I do want to work on the faces as if it's its own object. So I'm just going to press X and then limited dissolve, and it will remove all the unnecessary geometry on a flat face, something like that. So now I can just go on here and press E and then Y and type 0.3. and this one as well, these ones. Press EX and then minus 0.3, and then this one here, EX 0.3. So we don't need to necessarily see the back face. I mean, if you did want to do the back ones, you can, but we're not going to see it from this camera angle anyway. But that's basically going to be the outside wall. So let's just snap that down there so it's nice. Okay, that's nice. I'm actually going to, this isn't in the floor plan, but just to clean this up a little bit, these edges, I'm just going to do G and then X just to make sure that they are snapped, something like that. So that looks a bit better. So now we have this inside and outside created. What we're going to work on now is to extrude the elements out, so such as this archway. Let's create this door frame and create this door frame as well. So to create this frame on the top, so there's going to be a top section where the door is going to go. I'm just going to go into edit mode. I'm going to press Ctrl R, and then I'm just going to drag this down to the bottom and then press GZ 2.7. There we go. And I'm actually just need to create some extra geometry because I want to bridge these faces, but there is already a face on the top. So I just need to give it some more geometry so that it can actually bridge it correctly. So I'm just going to click on these two, press J. I can then delete this face. I can then select these two and do right click, bridge faces. So now it's created that extra geometry. It has actually also made a face on the top, but I don't necessarily need that. So I'm just going to delete that face. That might cause some bevel to appear there later on, but we don't need that there. So there we go. So now we have the door frame. And now there's also one here. So just for now, I'm just going to grab this top edge, bring it down to the bottom and press GZ2. What you can also do is you can go to here and do edge length. So any edge that you're clicking on, it will actually tell you the length. And as you bring that down, you can actually see the number, but it is more accurate to actually give it a very specific number, because if I go up or down ever so slightly, it is actually going between 2 meters and 1.99, so it's not as accurate. So I like to just actually type in the number myself. So let's press 3, and then we can extrude this out like this. And then we also have this archway, and I actually just want to bring this geometry down, and that's going to be to GZ 2.385 was actually the final number it ended up being. So I can click on this face with face select. I'm switching between them by going 1, 2, 3. And with the face selected, I can just press E, and then I'm just going to go right to this outside edge. So what we can see here, there is an extra lip, but we'll create that later when we actually work on the archway. So that's perfect. Okay, and this is the basic room shape created. So this didn't take too long. I really like this method of simply just tracing around the room. I don't believe that you do need to ever have a thickness to the walls. Maybe in some cases where you have like an overview render of where you're looking at it like this, and maybe an isometric, and you kind of do a floor plan view, then having some thickness to the walls is important. However, if I just go in here, you can't see that the walls don't have the other side, and it kind of just adds to the complexity when you don't really need it. And even from the outside, maybe I can just extend these up a little bit. If I was to do a render like this, we can still see into the room, and it looks like everything has thickness, which is correct. So with this room created, what should we work on next? So as I know that this scene is going to be quite displacement heavy, I think that it's important to start now preparing for the displacement, and that starts with the archway. So in a lot of cases, if I'm just doing a simple ArchViz scene and it's just going to have simple white walls and there's going to be an archway, I'd probably be quite inclined to do rough geometry, maybe not something exactly like this, but just a quick example. If I did something like this, I can then add some bevel and maybe a few more cuts. I can then do shade auto smooth, and then that will be a nice archway, and that will render perfectly fine. Even though there's an n-gon, which is basically a face with more than 4 sides. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's turn off this. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, roughly 9 to 10 vertices per face. That can cause some shading errors, but when it's a completely flat wall, there are some things that you can do to mitigate that. However, as this is going to be quite a displacement heavy scene, displacement really works best when there's quads. So a quad is basically just a square type shape with just 4 sides, and with displacement that really works best. So we now need to craft the archway, and we need to make sure that it's going to stay quads. So when we add displacement later, it's all going to work perfectly fine. So this is basically my placeholder object. So I'm just going to use this to create the archways. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select all these faces. I'm going to press P, and separate that. And then I'm just going to pull that out. And now we get this shape. So I'm going to first work on this archway, and we're going to make it perfectly quads. And then we can then extrude it out to then fill out these areas. And this is all going to be as nice a quads as possible. It doesn't need to be a completely square shape. As long as there's just 4 sides per polygon and they're all roughly the same size, then that will be perfectly fine. So let's get to work. So firstly, I'm going to press Tab, go to Edit Mode, Edge Select. I'm going to click here and do Shift S, cursor to selected. I'm then going to come out into Object Mode, do Shift A. I'm going to add a circle. So I do know that this width from here to here is 1.66. And then I'm going to rotate on the y-axis 90 degrees. And then you can see there is rotation now on the object. So I'm just going to do Control A and apply that rotation. And that should help a little bit in the future if we need to move things around. So now I'm just going to bring this down ever so slightly so this top edge roughly aligns with there. And it doesn't need to be 100% correct. There might be a little bit of a gap here. But as this is going to have some sort of a displacement on it anyway, this is not going to be a completely smooth edge anyway. So something like that is perfectly fine. Right then, let's go into Edit Mode, press 1. I'm going to press E and then S and scale that out until there is about a square shape per face. So we can see here this is a rectangle, but if I scale that up, we can see now this is becoming more square-like. So that's about the size I would like. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to press 2, select all these faces, and then press F3 and type in Grid Fill. I'm just going to rotate this around so it's straight, as this will be quite useful later on when we want to extrude it inwards. So now what I'm going to do, I press 3, I'm going to delete these faces here and these ones here. And then I'm just going to add a mirror modifier. And I'm going to set that to be the y-axis like that. So it's obviously easier to just create one side rather than both. So the mirror modifier is great here. So then how do we create quads going up and left? So first of all, I'm going to select these 4 faces. I'm going to press E and then Z, roughly so they're square shape. Okay, now let's grab these ones and then press E and then Y, something like that. And we can already see quads appearing. So as you can see here, the quads are not 100% nice. That doesn't really matter too much. I think this will still work perfectly fine, especially for this kind of displacement because the displacement is so random. But if you have some displacement where you really have like square tiles, having them as square as possible is best. But I am going to make this look a little bit nicer. I'm just going to select these edges like this, and then I can go to Edit, and then because we enabled loop tools, we can click Relax if we wanted to, and it just kind of smooths out these edges, so it just looks a bit more visually pleasing. Right then, now I can do E and then Y. Right, now I can select these edges here, and then E and then Z, scale that on Z axis like that. And I'm also going to extrude this up a little bit, scale these on the Z axis. Now it doesn't actually matter that this is actually going over the top part of the room. We won't see this anyway, but basically this will prevent any gaps in the room anyway. So it doesn't matter that it goes a little bit over. It's not 100% necessary. I mean, we could bring this down if we wanted to, but I'm just going to leave it like that for now. So let's select these edges, do SY0, and then I can extrude these down as well. So bring this down like this. I'm just going to bring it right down through the floor, and then I can bring this over here as well. Let's bring it right over to this edge. Right then. And we can see now the mirror modifier is not necessary at this point, so I'm just going to do Control A and apply that while we're in object mode. Let's go back to edit mode, and let's select this edge. Hold down Alt, select all this, and bring this over like that. So now we have the basic room shape, and actually I'm just going to bring this out as well, just a little bit, just so it's a little bit bigger than the actual room, and might as well do that on this one as well. Let's bring this down a little bit. Right then, so we can now create the door. So we have this edge here, it's almost to this top edge of the door, so let's just bring this down on the Z axis, and now we can just extrude on the Y axis. On the y-axis, let's just bring it out a little bit more as well. So we got this door frame edge here, and we also have this archway created. So what I'm going to do is just press E, extrude that one out, and then I'm going to select the archway, which is going to be these faces here. If I press C, I could just use a brush and just select the edges I like. And then I can press E and extrude that out. And there we go. Well, we do have some Z fighting here because we do have some overlapping geometry, but we can ignore that for this second. Right, then, so this is mostly created, but I do know there is a lip here, and I don't actually have that lip created just yet. Let's select this one. Let's go into back out of local view, and let's select this floor plan and go back into local view, press 7, and then we can just go to this element and get that created. So I'm going to press tab, wireframe. Let's bring this out on the x-axis, and then I'm going to press E again, and then I'm going to select these, and we don't need to select these bottom edges. And now all I need to do is press E, then Alt S. Oh, there we go. Alt S, and bring that out like that. So now we've created that lip. So that's great. What I need to do now, you can kind of see that there is some jagged edges. So what I can do now is add some modifiers on top to smooth this out. I can do Shift Alt S if I wanted to, but you can still see these gaps. So adding a subdivision modifier on top will be nice, but we need to first add some bevel. So go to here, search bevel. I'm going to put this to about 0.07, 0.007. Something like that's fine. Let's give it a few more geometry. And then what I can do now is do Control 1, and that adds a subdivision modifier on top. And what I'm going to do is go back into edit mode, press 2. I'm going to select this outside edge. If you click it twice with Alt selected, it will then select the whole edge. And then I can just do Shift E and then press 1. And then that adds a crease around the whole edge. Otherwise we end up with these edges like this. So Shift E, press 1. And now we have some clean, hard edges. Right then, so what should we do now? So as I mentioned, we do want to add some perfect quads to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm just do Control R and add some loop cuts here. Like that. I'm going to do Control R and add some loop cuts here. I want all these squares to be roughly the same size. Doesn't need to be 100% accurate, but something like that is quite nice. Something like that. There we go. And also, we don't necessarily need these bottom edges. So I'm just going to select all these. If I select one of them, actually, I can do Shift G, select by similar normal, and it'll find all the faces facing the same direction. I can delete those. Right then. And that is looking quite nice. So let's have a look at the door. There's a little bit of pinching here from the subdivision modifier. However, we are actually going to add a door frame here, which will cover that. If you wanted to, you could go to the bevel modifier, and you could then go to geometry and set this to be arc, and that will give some more geometry around this edge. So if I turn that off, we can see it's created that kind of bevel. If I set it back to sharp, you can see it goes to a point which the subdivision modifier doesn't like as much. But in this particular case, arc can clean that up if you wanted to. We do have some shading artifacts. So what we could also do is go to shading, harden normals, and then that will make that bit work quite nice. So that looks nice. And now that we've added a bevel, we can then add the subdivision modifier, and that smooths it all out. So there we go. So now we have a nice archway, we have nice quads, the subdivision modifier is going to look really good here. Let's go back out of this local view. Let's select this original vertex and this face. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move that to a new collection with M. I'm going to put that into construction old. So any old parts that I don't necessarily need but might want to reference, I'm going to put it in here, and then I could just turn it off. So what we left here is a nice archway and a doorway. Okay, so there we go. So now we have this created. There is some gaps now where the floor should go, and all I'm going to do is just select this bottom edge, and all I'm going to do is just bring this out on the x-axis just so it overlaps. Now, normally in some rooms, as you'll see in the previous masterclass videos, this would probably be all one piece of geometry, or it might be separated, but it will match completely up with the other geometry. But simply because this is going to be displaced, certain elements could go backwards or forwards and then create some sort of gap. So do like in this case, just to make sure that elements are overlapping enough. And like I said, from the inside, you're not going to see this overlapping geometry anyway. So this looks perfectly fine from the inside. Okay, so we have these three walls, and let's separate these out. I'm going to go into edit mode. It's a bit annoying in backface culling mode. You can't actually see the faces. So let's go into the object. Let's select these faces here. And I'm just going to press P, separate that, and then go to this new object. So all I'm going to do is just add some extra loop cuts with Control R, just something to make a rough square shape, something like this. So then that should subdivide nicely. This one's a lot easier, obviously, than the archway. That's perfect. What I'm going to do then is going to go to click on this one and do Control L and copy modifiers. So for this one, all I'm going to do is, again, select the outer edge and then do Shift E, 1, and then that makes it sharp. So again, as we don't know where the displacement is going to go, maybe it's going to make some sort of gap. I'm just going to extend these edges so that we can remove the possibility that there's going to be some gaps. So I'm actually going to turn back face culling off and then turn off face orientation just for a second. So let's have a look here. So I want to basically extend these edges out. So let's select these ones and these ones and press X and then press EX just to extrude these out a little bit more. And then for this one, with snapping enabled, just press E and then M, merge by distance. And then for these ones as well, let's press E, just something like that. We can see these don't align up actually. Let's click on the first one, click on the next one, do M, merge at last. And then that's going to make those a solid face. We also have these ones. It doesn't really matter about the rest because we're not going to see it anyway. And then we have the floor as well. Let's extrude these out as well. Let's grab this, let's grab these edges and extrude these out on the X-axis. Just a little bit, and let's extrude this out and this one as well. M, merge by distance. Okay, and then this one also, I might as well just bring these out just a little bit more just in case. Displacement, I do feel like can be a little bit less unorganized. I do generally like everything to be nice and neat and clean, but I also like to remove any possibility of something going wrong. So that's going to make it not as pretty, but on the inside, it's going to be very, very pretty. Okay, next is this shape here. So we do have nice corners going on here, but they are nice and sharp. We do want it to be a little bit smoother. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a bevel modifier. I'm going to put it to 0.07 again, add some cuts, a segment, sorry. Then do right click, shade auto smooth, go to shading and click harden normals, and then that'll make things nice and straight. Because if you don't have that enabled, you can see that it looks like there's a little bit of a bend there. So it's not completely flat, but it will be flat. So just do that. And now the faces are nice and flat. For this one, we can add some bevel. Let's do the same thing. Click on this one, then click on this one, Control L, copy modifiers. And now we've got some nice bevel there as well. Okay, so we have the whole room basically created. So we have the archway and ready for displacement. We also have this wall ready for displacement. We have these walls and the floor. And we also have the outside elements created as well. Let's actually, for this outside area, let's also give that some bevel as well. And I want this one to be a little bit more rounded. So something like this. I think that's fine for now. Right. And what should we work on next? So the elements that we have remaining, we have camera composition, lighting, materials, adding the assets and rendering and then post-production. So the element which I'd work on next would probably be the lighting and just a basic camera angle, because from at this point, for one, I get quite excited and I just want to see how the room is turning out. So I'll probably do some rendering. And also, if I was to start on the materials, get all the materials done, then add the lighting, I might then need to tweak all the materials again because then the lighting has changed and things might not work correctly. So I prefer to choose some lighting which I think looks good, and then I can work on the materials and then tweak the lighting a little bit later if I need to. So for that, I'm going to find a rough camera angle which I think works. So I'm just going to press 1. I'm going to do Shift A, camera, and then do Control 0 on the number pad, and then I can go into the camera. So if I go to View, Navigation, Walk Navigation, I recommend assigning that to the shortcut Shift F, which is from a really old shortcut from like Blender 2.79. And then if I do Shift F, I can then walk backwards through the scene, roughly to a position I like. If you also press Tab, you can literally walk around using the AWS keys on the left. So let's do that. Let's just do right click, go back to where it was and just go backwards. So for this camera, for this main shot, what I would quite like, in the past, I've always gone quite high because I love the feel of a 70mm, and then you go straight back and then you can basically clip through the wall. I think it creates quite a nice effect. However, for this scene, I thought it looked quite nice going more wide angle at 35mm, and Let's go back something like this. I do actually want to see the beginning of the step and the beginning of this area. This isn't going to be the final camera, but just to start, just to get it roughly in the position, I'm just going to bring up the clip start and something like this, just so I can get through the wall. There we go. So now we have something like that. And now what I'm going to do, just go to viewport display and turn this up, just so there's no distractions. Right then, let's work on the lighting now. So what we can do, if you really wanted to, is go to shading, shade editor, go to the world tab, and you might have already some nodes here. What I'm just going to do is add a sky texture and then add a background. I do like the sky texture. I think it gives you a lot of flexibility. So then I can do a render preview. And then you can change the sun rotation if you wanted to. I do want the sun to go in something like this. And then you can reduce the strengths and things like that. You basically have quite a lot of fine tuning. You can see it's already going to like an evening shot simply by changing this. You can see go more and more evening. Something like that. And as you see, if you bring it all the way down, you can see it going more and more red. And it actually looks like a little sunset going off in the distance. You can make the sun bigger as well, because sometimes the illusion is when you look through for a window that the sun can look quite large, especially when it's quite low. But when it was 0.5, it looks tiny. It doesn't look as accurate as it would in a photograph sometimes. But in this case, although it does have a lot of flexibility, I do straight away just want to go over HDRI because that's already done for me. I'm going to go with an overcast sky, and that's simply because with an overcast sky, it means that there's completely flat lighting. It's like nature's softbox. So if you've seen photography for products, sometimes the product is put into like a white softbox, and it's a very familiar feel. So I do like to go to the Corona render on Behance to get some inspiration. And we can see that it's kind of like this kind of feel. There's no direct sunlight. The lighting is very, very soft. And that's quite a common theme. It happens quite a lot in these interior renders where there might be a little bit of sunshine, but quite often you end up with something quite soft. And I do feel like that works quite well. In the scene, I will be adding a sunlight, but adding that overcast HDRI in the first place is quite useful as a starting point. So in this case, I will be using the iMesh Asset Manager. And if you want to install it, you just click add remote repository, https extensions.imesh.com/repo. Just click check it for updates and click create. And then that will give you the iMesh Asset Manager. And from that, I can just install this add-on. And then what I can do is if I download any HDRIs, I can add them to a folder, and then I can view them in here with some extra adjustable parameters, which I think is quite useful. So if I search for add-ons now that it's installed, okay, I think I actually had a test version actually already installed. But anyway, if you go to iMesh here to add-ons, you can go to paths, and then these are where the objects get downloaded. So if you actually have an iMesh subscription, you can download directly into here, and this is where they'll get downloaded to. But in this case, I just want to talk about HDRIs. So all my HDRIs do get put into one folder on my computer, which I would recommend. So this is where my HDRIs are saved. So this is what I'm going to select and click add custom path here. And then I'm going to say that it's a HDRI folder, and then I'm just going to click save preferences. And then if I go to the local tab, and then I can click on this HDRI, and then just click refresh, and we can see all the HDRIs appearing. So there is one I like. And if I go to Polyhaven and just get this overcast soil, this is the one I'm going to be using for this render. Of course, you can try many other HDRIs. So this is the overcast section, and we can see here we have a bunch which look really, really nice. I quite like them. Oh, exactly. This one is the one I'm going for. It's quite a bright HDRI, very even lighting. And this should make quite a nice natural effect. But of course, you can go to any of these that you like. I also like that in the distance, there's not going to be much interference with objects or buildings, like a trees in the background or something. So it's quite a flat, plain one as well, which is also something I quite like. So with this folder created, I can just search for overcast soil, and then I click apply. It's going to make a new node group. I already have a bunch of stuff in here already, so let's just remove these. If you didn't want to use this asset manager, that's of course totally fine. All you need to do is add a Shift A, type in environment texture. You just open it here, overcast soil, and then add a background texture and plug that in like this, and then that will work. The benefit of having this this add-on is that it gives you these options to tweak. So you can increase or decrease the sun strength, the sky overall, the diffuse strength. You can adjust a bunch of things. One thing I really like, for example, you can simply replace the background with any color you like. So to remove any distractions, I am just going to set it to white for now, because I am actually going to add a backplate anyway, so that removes any distractions. If you didn't have this node, all you need to do is add a light path node. Let's grab this one as well. Add a background texture, put this into there, and then duplicate that. Then add a mix shader and plug this into here. We can check that out, and then we say, is it the camera ray? If it is, then, which is no, and then yes, basically white and black, then it's going to be this one. So I can change that to be any color I like. It won't actually change any colors of the room itself. But I do already have this node set up already, so we'll just leave that. Okay, and that's looking quite nice. Now the next thing I want to do is actually add in some sunshine. So to do that, all I'm going to do is add a sun lamp. I'm just going to do shift right click there and shift A. I'm going to add a sun. I'm going to rotate this, something like this. We can see that the edges are quite sharp and I want it to be a bit softer. So I'm going to change this to be something like 5. And I can just increase the strength. Something like 5 for now. I'm probably going to increase this. I think this room is going to be quite dark anyway. The materials are going to be quite dark. So I might increase this sun strength in the end, but this is perfectly fine. And then I'm going to click use nodes. For the color, I'm going to set that to be black body. And then I'm going to set that to be 5000. There we go. So slightly warmer, and that looks nice. So now that we have the basic room shape and some basic lighting, we can start working on materials. But there is actually something which I did need to talk about, and that is actually there's going to be an inset going all the way around this room, so that when we add some more lighting later on, we can put the lighting inside that little gap. So to do that, it's very, very simple. All I'm going to do is click on this top room edge, and I'm going to press I, something like 0.1, and then I'm just going to extrude that down by 0.1 minus, there we go. So now we have a little bit of an inset, and we can add some edge lighting going inside of there. So that looks good. Right then. So we have the basic room shape and some basic lighting, and now let's work on some materials. So the first materials I'm going to work with are simply going to be the floor and the walls and the ceiling. These displacement ones are going to take a little bit more work. So first of all, let's create this ground material. So back to Polyhaven, if you go to Assets, Textures, and then if I search for Painted Concrete, we can get this one here, and I just want to download this one. The reason why I wanted to choose this one is because it's 4 meters wide, which is amazing. The textures, especially when they're going to be taking up so much space, the bigger the better. So in this case, 4 meters is amazing. And also when you download it, it comes with a .blend file, so you can append that into the scene nice and easily. So I'm going to go to File, Append. Then I'm going to find that folder, and in this case, I've saved it here. So I'm going to double click that, and I've just got the 4K version, which is more than enough. I think 2K would also be fine, but I've got 4K for now. We might tweak that a little bit later, but let's just go to Material, and we're just going to select this. And now we have the material for that. So let's find the painted material. Okay, so now that we've added a material, we do actually need to unwrap this whole object. So I'm going to press Tab, A, U, unwrap. That should be fine because it's a completely flat object and it's unwrapped nicely. Then I'm going to go to the shader editor and make sure I'm on object. And this is what has been imported. So if I was just to do a preview render, so just do this, render preview, we can see this floor. So I think personally that this floor for me is, for one, the scale is off. So these bumps look massive, but in fact, it should be a lot smaller. So I'm going to scale this. I'm going to try 4 times and we can do a preview. I'm actually just going to press Control B and just highlight just this area. And then I'm going to try rotating this 90 degrees. And I think it actually made some nicer lines going this way when I did some testing. So that's perfectly fine. We can't see the repetition very easily, especially we're going to have other objects in the scene anyway, which is going to be covering up any sort of tiling. But the marks on the floor, the sizes look fine. We maybe can go a little bit higher and make these little marks a little bit smaller, but in general, that should be fine. Right then. So now I think it's a little bit too dark. So I'm going to do Shift A and let's just zoom out a little bit. And what I do have automatically is I have denoising enabled. I have it set to none because none allows you to still see a bit more detail as it's rendering. If I set it to accurate, it kind of blurs out a lot of the details in some cases. So I just have that set to none, and automatic, albedo and normal, and use GPU, and it starts at 128 samples. So then that's why it's cleaning up quite nicely. But yeah, like I said, this is too dark. So I'm going to do Shift A, hue saturation. I'm going to try something like 4, just to increase the brightness like that. Now, this is something you need to be quite careful of. So if I, for example, let's add a cube over here. Let's try something like this. I'm going to give that a new material. And let's say I'm just going to add a RGB node. And then I'm going to add a hue saturation node and then plug that into here. So if I was to set this to say 4, for example, we can see it gets brighter. Now, if I make it even brighter, this is already pure white, and we've set it to 4, and now we can start to see it's almost like it's glowing. Whereas if I make a new object like this, and we can see how much light is coming off of that. It is a light, okay, in this case. That is going a little bit crazy. Let's make a new material, and let's change this to be back to there. This is only going to be pure white, and even then, in quite a lot of instances, you can, even when it's pure white, it can still sometimes make it look like it is glowing. This is obviously a much more extreme case, but let's delete these. So all I'm trying to say is, when you want to add the hue saturation node, don't go too high, because there might be parts of this texture which are lighter than others. So there might be little flecks of white in this paint, maybe on the floor. And if you set this too high, they might be so bright that they are now emitting their own light. So don't go too crazy with that. That for me worked nice. I'm also going to reduce this saturation to about 0.85. And that's nice. So basically I'm just removing the color a little bit from there. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give the same material from the floor onto the ceiling as well. So I'll click on this object first, hold down Shift, click on this one, do Control L, and link materials. For this one, it hasn't been unwrapped yet. This one's a little bit more complex. So I'm going to do Tab, A, U, and just do a quick Smart UV unwrap. Now, because I've done a Smart UV unwrap, if I look here, that will mean that these edges are not connected. So if I go to the UV editor, we can see that they are not connected. Whereas in a good case, you probably want to do it like this. So now these are all connected and the texture will run around it. However, because this texture is so random, it's really hard to tell that it doesn't actually continue around. And from the camera's point of view, you're never going to be able to tell the difference. So that for me works fine. And now we can see the room is getting a lot darker. And when I said I rotated this 90 degrees, it was because this texture has some nice lines going down, which will look pretty good. So the next thing I want to do is actually change something. I'm actually going to add a node group onto the roughness. And this is based off of Christopher 3D from YouTube. I'd highly recommend actually just please check out his channel. So he goes into a lot of detail, very, very technical about how Blender works on the most fundamental level. And when Blender, I think it was Blender 3.0 or a bit later version came out, the principal shader was updated, and a lot of people assumed one of the updates was variable roughness, which means as you look at an object from a glancing angle, the more of a glancing angle it is that you look at the object, the more reflective it looks. Now, people were under the impression that when the Blender principal shader got updated, that was something which was updated, but in reality it was actually part of the specularity which was actually updated in that way. It was actually something about energy conservation. So that I was actually under that impression too, that when it was updated that the glancing angles would look more reflective, but that actually isn't the case. So Christopher 3D explained that you can make a node setup and you can actually put that into the principal shader yourself through this roughness input, which works really well. And it is actually similar to adding a coat layer. But that actually gets a little bit more technical. It involves adding full roughness, adding coat, and something about metallic. That's going a bit beyond me on a technical level. For me, if it looks good, that's all that matters. So I'm going to add this node group here. Just type in roughness Fresnel and just plug that straight onto here. I will supply that in that same blend file for the original file. And what that has done is, if I go out of here, so if I preview this, what the layer weight what this basically does is, as you go lower and lower, you can see that the color is changing. So we've inverted that with this shader. So as you get lower and lower to the ground, it gets more and more dark, and the higher you get, the more white it gets. So lower and lower and lower, it gets darker and darker. So what I've done is I've grabbed my roughness texture and plugging that into this multiply, and I'm multiplying my roughness input by this. So over here where it's pure white, that's going to be my original roughness texture, and as it goes further and further down to the dark, it's going to make my roughness texture darker and darker. Now for the roughness texture, if I just show you an example, if I add an RGB node and if I have it set to white, that is equivalent to having 1 roughness. It means 100% roughness. So plug that into there. Let's preview this. That's going to be pure rough. If I make it black, that's going to make it glossy. So we can see the reflections there, where it's like a puddle of waters over this whole surface. So the more black it gets, the more glossy. So that's basically what this is doing. So we've got my roughness texture up here, and the further and further I go down, the darker and darker it gets, and the more glossy it's going to appear. So just try it yourself. Go to any surface that looks rough, but it's relatively a flat surface. Move your eye right down, and the closer and closer it is you get to the object, the more glossy it will appear. So let's plug that into there, and let's preview that. So from this angle, it's quite glossy, almost like a mirror, but the higher and higher you get, the more it gets back to my original texture. So from the camera's point of view, if I go back, if I do a preview, we can see that it's quite reflective over there, but the closer it gets to the camera, the less glossy it is. So this to me is more realistic. And if you look at Christopher 3D, I'll put a link to it in the description, and that will explain this in a bit more detail. And you can see he's done some incredible examples of why this works. As this room is starting to get a little bit darker, I am going to increase the sun. So I'm actually going to push it to something like 20. I'm actually going to push it to something like 30, quite bright. Because we're going to add darker walls over here as well. And in the past, I actually used to be quite scared of having overexposed areas in a render. However, overexposed images is something you see so common that it can add some more realism to your scene. So I'm not too scared about having certain elements overexposed. Of course, if a huge portion of the scene is overexposed, it looks incorrect. But if there's an outdoor area, this is completely overexposed, then that's fine. So this is looking good. I think there's still a little bit too much color in this. So what I'm going to do is maybe put 0.75, and I'll make it a bit more white. And then I think that should be good. I'm also going to tweak this roughness a little bit further. So I think that it's quite flat, that there's not much variation. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a color ramp. And this will allow me to fine tune this even further. So shift, control, and click, and we can just preview that. And then all I'm going to do is just slide this down, and we can add more contrast to this roughness map. So we can do something like that. So if we did something like this, basically these black areas will be completely glossy, and these bits will be completely rough. But that's a little bit too much. Let's bring this back, something like this. Just a little bit more contrast as a comparison. Just adds a bit more interest. So let's preview that. I believe that might be a little bit too glossy at that point. So I'm just going to add some roughness to this by doing Shift A, search math, and I'm just going to add 0.5 roughness to that. We can see that looks something like this. Let's try 0.1. Okay, there we go. So as you can see here, this bit is a bit more pronounced, that this bit's rougher and this bit's more glossy. So it adds a bit more interest to the scene. You can also add a bit more contrast to this if you really wanted to. And then you get something like this. Actually, I might prefer that, to be honest. So let's keep it like that. Right then, so now we have the scenes coming together. Let's work on some displacement. I'm going to work on displacement first on this part. Then I'm going to work on this part because this is going to require some texture painting to create a really nice plaster painted effect. So yeah, let's work on this plaster. So for this one, I would recommend an iMesh subscription. If you don't have that, you can obviously find some other stone textures if you like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press N. I'm just going to go to iMesh, and then I'm going to go to materials. And then I'm just going to go to stone, and then I'm just going to look for stone split rock, this one here. So I'm just going to apply the 4K. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this, this color. And I'm also, just for this, I'm just going to remove the normal map, because I'm only going to rely on the displacement map. The normal map is, in this case, is like derived basically from the displacement during the creation. So you can use the normal map if you wanted to, if you don't want to have any displacement. So if this object's quite in the distance, but I simply want to rely only on the displacement in this. And that already has a lot of information in this file. So I'm going to go to settings, And I'm going to make sure it's set to displacement and bump, which it is. And then that should look pretty good. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go to the base color, and then I'm just going to try to find like a beige kind of color. Oopsie, something like this. Oh, sorry, let's try again. Something like this I think is good. Okay, something like this. This is the actual hex code that I'm actually using if you want to copy that. And now if I do render preview, we're going to see not much happening. So this is being displaced, but we can't actually see it. So how do we see this displacement? So first of all, we need to enable feature set experimental. It has been experimental forever. I do wonder when it's not going to be experimental, but let's go to modifiers, and then I'm going to add another. Let's turn this one off. I only want one subdivision. I'm going to add another subdivision modifier on top of that. I'm going to set that to be simple, and then I'm actually going to turn off this, because basically to enable physical displacement, you need to make sure that the subdivision modifier is on the top. Whether if you've got a smooth by angle, that's always trying to be on the top. So let's remove that, and then we get this option. So I'm just going to tick that button. We can turn off viewport levels to be 0. We don't really need this to be adding any additional subdivision. I believe this is actually probably going to be removed in 4.5, I believe. So with adaptive subdivision turned on and experimental turned on, what I'm going to do is press tab and press U and just unwrap. And we can start to see something happening here. Let's actually go out, see this. So it's the texture is far too big. So what I'm going to do is go to UV editor. I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees. And then I'm just going to scale this up roughly to about the size I like. And we can see here that this is now being displaced. So this is a perfect example of displacement where we can see the edges are being pronounced quite nicely. So if we go into the camera preview, and this is basically what it's using for the information. So where it's darker, it's going to be lower, and where it's white, it's going to be higher. And let's do a preview. If you do want this to be more pronounced, what you can do is under this displacement modifier, if I do 0.2, for example, then these bricks are going to be poking out a lot more. But that's a little bit too strong. So let's go back to 0.1. Okay, so that's coming together nicely. One thing what we can do is that as the bricks are on the bottom there, what we can do, if we go into tab, and let's just turn this off so we can see it. If I was to bring this up, I'm going to just try to see if I can make it so that the bricks at the bottom there just actually align with the bottom. I don't think we'll actually see that bottom, but it's just something to take care of with these bricks. Okay, and I think it's fine at the top as well, because it looks like they're kind of going off into the ceiling. Okay, so I just had a crash, and hopefully I got it back to where it should have been. This is a friendly reminder to save your project. Okay, so in this corner, we can see there are some artifacts here. So if I go into this mode here, we can see that we have some bevel, but the bevel is maybe a little bit too strong for this wall. So in these areas where the wall goes backwards, it's going too far that there's some sort of some artifacts poking out here. So what I'm going to do is for the bevel, I'm just going to increase it a little bit. So 0.15 perhaps, and that has smoothed that out. That's a bit better. Let's try 0.2. And that's even better. So that's helped. In this corner, there is also some creasing, but I don't think we're going to see that. And I think it probably is going to be fine for this case. If we're going to do a render like this, which I think we are, and we do see that element, we might adjust it. But for now, that's just something to be aware of. If you've got displacement around a corner, adding a little bit more geometry can help that. So let's go back out. Now, while I am here, there is also something else to mention. So inside of Blender, there is a parameter called diffuse roughness. Diffuse roughness is independent from this roughness, and it's basically part of, if I do Shift A, and there is actually a diffuse node, and there's a thing called diffuse roughness, and this parameter is basically this parameter here. So this is very good for materials which are very rough, so a plaster or concrete or fabrics and things like that, chalk, something that's meant to be very rough. So that's where I'm going to use this. So for this material here, I'm going to turn up diffuse roughness. Okay, so what I've got here are two spheres, and they both have the same roughness, the same material. Now for this one here, I'm going to increase the diffuse roughness to 1, and we can see that this object appears that more light is being reflected back at the camera, because this is basically simulating lots and lots of little holes in the surface. So there could be more parts of the surface where more light could be reflected straight back at the camera. So that's basically the effect that's going on here. I don't know the exact technical details for this, but I have found for more rough materials that this appears more visually pleasing and it seems more accurate to me. So for all rough materials, I've been using diffuse roughness to 1. You may not notice much of a difference anyway. In this case, it looks like it gets a bit more darker. And this is also a rough material, so I'm going to do the same thing here. Let's put the diffuse roughness to 1. And that's good. So I will be trying to do that for a few of the materials. When we get to the assets, so a lot of the assets were made in previous versions of Blender, and they don't have this diffuse roughness component added yet. So, and I believe that will also be the case when you add lots of materials, lots of assets to your scene when you've downloaded them from other sources. I don't know if they'll all be updated yet, so just be aware of this. And also for this material, I do have this variable roughness, and I would like to add it to this one as well. So at glancing angles, the elements which are facing away from the camera appear more glossy. So I'll just drop that onto here. And we probably won't notice much difference from this particular object, but that should work. Okay, so now what we're going to work with is going to be texture painting. So this is something I think is completely underrated in Blender, the fact that you can even do this, but it's an incredible way to be able to switch materials. So in this case, I'm going to create a mask, which will switch between 2 materials. And to be able to just paint exactly where you want on the object, whatever you want, is such an incredible skill to have. And I myself hardly touched this in the past, but I've started using it more and more. So in this case, to make the story of this room more believable, because whenever you're doing something in the scene, it has to make sense. So we have 2 materials already. We have like a plaster where they've just gone over the whole wall and surfaces and made it this like a dried concrete plaster material. And then we have this stone. So we can imagine that most of this room used to be this stone and they're plastered over certain elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mask that will blend from the stone into the plaster, because as you can imagine, maybe to create this archway they had to drill a hole in this rock and then plaster it nicely to make the archway. So we can imagine this will all be plaster, and then it will blend into the stone that used to be there. Now, as you can imagine, the plaster will probably be overlaid over the top, so we need to make sure that using a mix between the displacements and the masks, that the plaster is also slightly more raised than this stone. It might seem complicated, but hopefully I can make this easier for you guys, so you can actually start using this in your own projects, because I think it's very cool to have, and you can blend in, you can paint any elements like some moss or something on the ground or something like that. I think it's just a very good skill to have. So let's get to work with that. So we have this object. It might look slightly different because, like I said, it crashed and I had to recreate this bit. But what we're going to do is I'm just going to separate a few elements because we don't necessarily need this doorway. So what I just did just then was I marked a seam, and it's just actually a quick way to just select this and do Control L, and it will select everything within that, and then I can just separate that so it's its own object. I do then need to reselect this edge, do Shift E and press 1 to crease that again. We can also do that for this part. We won't actually see this element anyway, but just good to do. Shift E, 1, there we go. So now we have the doorway. We'll also have some creasing here. If you wanted to fix that, what you could do is do Shift E, 1 like that. Like I said, this is going to be covered by a door anyway, so it's okay if it's a little bit janky. We're not going to see it. I'm also going to select this edge here, mark a seam here, and separate this part, because this is already going to be in the part which has the plaster anyway, so we can ignore that. And then let's also just select this edge again, Shift E, 1, and there we go. Let's just select this edge, E1, Shift E1. Oh, and I just realized screencast keys is off, so let's bring that back. So then we have this archway, we need to unwrap it. So I'm going to press E, A, U, and just do unwrap angle based. We're going to go to the UV editor and we'll check out how it looks. So as we are going to have some stone, and it does need to be going straight, because stone usually goes like that. Usually stone doesn't go whoop. We need to make sure that based on the texture, so if I get the stone bricks, let's get the height map like that. So we can see the stones going like this. So if I rotate this like this, so it's straight, we can see that this element is now going to be going straight along the bricks, which is correct. And we're just going to move it like that. This part is a bit warped, which doesn't really matter because this is going to have a plaster there anyway. So even if the plaster goes this direction, you would never be able to tell the difference because that's not important. So as long as this section is straight, then everything is going to be good. So let's do some texture painting. I'm going to make a new material and I'm going to call that plaster and stone. Then I'm going to go to the shade editor and I'm going to make a new image called Shift A, search, image, and I'm going to click new. I'm just going to call that paint plaster mask and click new image. Right then, and this is going to be what we use to switch between materials. So let's go over to texture painting, and then from here, all you need to do, you can just paint straight onto the object. Now, as we want to create a mask, generally all masks are going to be black and white. So I'm just going to undo that. I'm going to set that to be white, and then we can paint onto the object like this. So now we can see we have a black and white mask. So if I go and bring up this and go to the UV editor, and then I can type in mask, and we've got the plaster mask there. So then all I need to do is save as. And now I've saved that. So now we can use that mask in the render. So if I make two materials, we've got one here. We now have a new material. I'm going to add a mix shader with Shift A, add mix shader. Plug these two materials in. So we can have one that's going to be red, one that's going to be a metallic green. And we're going to have a factor input here, and we're going to use the mask. So where it's going to be black, it's going to be the first input. Where it's going to be white, it's going to be the second input. So let's plug this one into here. Now, if I do a render preview, we can see that we have now painted on that mask. So I can paint like this, and we've seen that's updated. Let's save that image. Let's re-render that. And we can see that has now updated too. So we're going to use that to switch between the two materials. So first of all, let's create a nicer mask. Let's just go back to solid view. And I'm just going to switch that back to black. And let's just paint something like this. And let's actually, this does need to be white. Let's bring this over like that. Right then. So to create a nicer mask, what we can do is actually add a texture. So if I go to Tool, pressed N, has my screencast keys turned off? I feel like this keeps happening for some reason. Right, it's back. I believe this screencast keys might need an update for 4.4. Anyway, let's go to Tool, and we can see information about the brush. So I'm going to switch it to be the soft paint soft, which makes a bit more of a softer edge. Let's change this back to white. And then I can choose a texture. So if we go to Polyhaven, we can see that we have this material here, Rock Face 3. I'm going to click these buttons here. I'm going to find Displacement, PNG. So once you've downloaded that, click on New, click on this little toggle, and then that'll bring up this menu, and then that's where we're going to select the texture. So I'm just going to open that and select it. Right then, so that has now added that into there, and we can see that is there now. So if I paint there, we can see that has now appeared. However, if I keep clicking, we can keep seeing that the texture is still always going to be facing the same direction. So one of the things we want to adjust is random angle. So now every time I click, it's going to be a random angle, which is more realistic. And then for the blend, I'm going to set that to be screen. So every time we click, it's going to get brighter and brighter. So if I paint around the edges, we can see that it's going to be a nice stone rock texture, and then if I keep drawing it, it's going to be filling in the white bits. So that's going to be good. So what I'm going to do here is just make my way down here. Let's actually change the brush type to be, let's change the stroke to be dots. I think that will give me a bit more fine tuning. So something like this. And I'm just going to change the strength down a little bit. Okay, so now we got this mask, which should be a little bit nicer. So I'm going to save that. And now if I go to render preview, we can see that that should be a little bit nicer of an edge. So what we can also do, as we have created this mask, we can actually make these a little bit more obvious. So I can do Shift A and search for a color ramp. And let me just do Control Shift and click. And then I can actually tighten these up like this. So we can make this edge more prominent if we wanted to. So that could look like painted plaster already. So if I preview that, we can see that edge appearing like that. So what I want to do now is, instead of a red and green, I want to add a two materials. So we already have the materials in the scene. So let's go back. We have this one here. Let's go, just bring this back down. Oh, and also, if you wanted to know, if you go to texture paint, once you have been painting, you can click save all images there and it will automatically save them. But anyway, let's go to the materials. So we have this one and I will keep this displacement and everything. Let's just grab all of this and do Control C. Go to here and this one and do Control V. And this is going to be the second material because that's going to be this one here. So instead of the green, I'm going to plug in this one. And then we also already have the brick as well. So let's grab this one and click this, Control C, and go over to here. And instead of this one, we're going to use this material and plug that one into there as well. So we actually don't have this normal, we're not going to use this normal map or this one. So let's just clean it up a little bit, make it a little bit nicer on the eyes. Okay, so let's delete this as well and let's see how this looks. Okay, so the first thing we'll notice is that there's nothing on this one because the main feature of this wall is going to be the displacement, but we don't have any displacement enabled. So what I'm going to do is let's go to the materials tab, go to settings and say displacement. Let's do displacement only. And we can still see there's no displacement because we've mixed in the shader, but the displacement maps themselves, they have not been mixed in. So we do need to mix those together. So what we're going to do is I'm going to do Shift A and search for mix color. I'm going to plug in, set that to be vector, plug in the first one, plug in the second one, and then I can grab this color ramp and plug that in there as well. And then I plug that one into the output and we can still see not much. I think because these bricks are huge, so let's scale these down maybe to something like 5. And we still see nothing much is happening because we need to add some more subdivision. So lastly, let's add another subdivision on top. So this subdivision on its own is being used to smooth out this archway. So I'm just going to leave that as it is. And then I'm going to add another subdivision modifier on top because I believe if I set it to adaptive, there is actually viewport levels. And I think I saw that there was going to be an update that's going to be removed. Maybe I'm wrong, but just in case, that's why I'm keeping this one here. I'm just going to leave that off. So this one's going to be doing the subdivision. And I think I'm actually going to change that to be displacement and bump, get a bit more detail in there, and that looks good. So, and then what we can see here is that this blends in quite well. However, it looks very smooth here. So what we can do is we can then change the mid-level point of the brick. So if I bring the brick back like this, or the other way, let's bring it back. We can see now that this is creating like a lip where the plaster has been painted on, but I might tweak this mask a little bit more. Let's bring this up, make this quite harsh. There we go. Something like that. And now this looks like the plaster has been put on top. Maybe the gap between is a little bit too strong. Let's change this. Okay, I think that looks good. Let's go into the camera preview and see from this angle. And yeah, that looks nice. So let's actually I do like this quite harsh edge created here. Let's actually bring this. I think maybe it's still a little bit too far away. Let's bring this back. Basically, you just want it to look like the plaster's been painted on top. So it's like a dip, and then it goes out and gets raised where the plaster's been added. So I think that's fine. Okay, so that's good. Let's try see how it looks in the scene. Okay, and as I mentioned before, with the displacement, we might get some errors. So there is now a gap at the top. So let me just grab this roof, as that was one part I did miss. Let's grab this roof, and let's also grab this edge like this, just so it covers that gap. Okay, that's good. And also, of course, this material should be the same as the floor as well. So click on this object, click on this floor, Control L, and link material. And this obviously needs to be unwrapped as well. So you unwrap, And if we go to the UV editor, this is going to be quite large because if you'd imagine, this whole floor is taking up this much space, whereas this element on its own is taking up way more space. So one thing we can do if you want to check the scales of all the textures, if I just select these objects, I'm going to go to the shader editor and I'm just going to do Shift A. Image texture, I'm going to click New, and then generated, I'm going to choose UV grid and click New Image. If I go to Edit Preferences, make sure that Node Wrangler is enabled like this, and then hold down Control T, and then that will add texture coordinates for that, and then Shift. Where's my screencast keys turned off again? Okay, right, there we go. So now hold down Control Shift and click, and now we can see how the UVs are looking. So we can see that the square size on this object is smaller than on this object. So let's select this one, Edit Mode, select all, and scale that up, just until roughly the squares are about the same size. Okay, and then with this one, the squares are very, very small. So let's scale this down roughly to about the same size. And it doesn't really matter that there's going to be some warping here. This is such a random material, we won't be able to tell. So let's delete this, bring that back, and they should all be roughly the same size. So that's good. Let's go back out and let's see how this is all looking. Okay, fantastic. So as you can see here, this edge looks even more prominent now with the sunshine because that's casting a shadow here. This looks a lot more realistic, and there's a definite gap where they've painted plaster over the top of this surface. So that works really, really well. So what I want to do now, I'm going to do a little bit of a cleanup because it's already starting to get a bit messy. So I'm just going to click on this object and start naming them. So I'm going to call this walls, wall, ceiling. I'm going to call this one floor. And this one's going to be, sorry, let's turn this off. This one's going to be right brick. This one's going to be called archway. And this piece is going to be called arch inside. And then we have maybe outdoor floor. And this object, I believe, is already separated. I can't remember what it was from the crash. So it's separated floor. Anyway, let's just call this one pool. If I didn't separate it yet, just make sure it's its own object. And then we have vert force. We've got this one called, this one's going to be outside wall. Right then, so now I could just click on all these elements. So this one, select all of this. And that's good. Let's get this archway as well. Right, and I'm going to move that to its own collection called construction, or you could call it architecture, or whatever you want to call it, or simply just walls. Let's just go walls. Right, create. So now let's clean things up. The camera should not be in there. Let's bring that back to the scene. And which one is the circle? Okay, so this one's just doorway. It just makes it a little bit easier. I think cleaning your file up always just really, really helps. So we also have the sun. Let's move this one to lighting. And then I'm going to right click on here and set that to be yellow. And then the camera, I'm going to move to cameras. Yeah. Okay. And then right click on here. I'm going to set that to be blue, and walls, I'm going to set it to brown because our walls are brown. So that looks good. So then now that we've done that, let's work on adding some lighting into these elements. So I'm going to click on lighting, and then I'm going to shift right click in here and do Shift A, light, area light, and then let's go to the top view, and we can scale that down just so it roughly fits into this gap. It doesn't need to be 100% correct, and then scale it like this on the y-axis and scale it like that. Right then, now we have that lamp. What I'm going to do is go to the object data properties, and I'm going to set use nodes, black body. I'm going to set that to be 3800. Now, a lot of my lights now, I'm going to be adding a few in the scene, and I'm going to try to make sure one of the most important things when you're creating a scene, make sure that all the colors all work together. So I will try to make sure that most of my lamps are going to be about 3800, which is quite warm. Let's see how that is going to look. Okay, it's maybe a bit too strong. Let's change that to be about 5. And that's a nice glow going in there. Okay, yeah, that looks pretty good. Maybe it's a little bit too strong in that sense. Let's change it to about 3. And just a nice glow. I don't want it to be too overburned over there. Okay, nice. Okay, so now I want to add another one over here. So I'm just going to grab this one I've already created and go to top and do Shift D over here and bring that to this gap here. And now I'm just going to scale it up on the y-axis like this. Okay, and we can preview this one. And this one doesn't look as bright, so let's just increase the brightness for that one, maybe 10 or 7. I basically want them to appear about the same brightness, so maybe 6. Okay, that's good. Maybe this one can be a little bit darker. Let's try 2. Okay, great. So this is some really nice touches here. So now I want to add one into this edge here. So I'm going to select this object here. I'm going to go into local view and let's just select this inside edge. So this one here, hold down Alt, click on this edge and it will select that whole edge. I'm going to press add a new material, click new and type in emission. Right then, and assign that to that. So now I can go to, instead of principal BSDF, I'm going to choose emission. And for color, I'm going to choose black body. And again, we're going to choose 3800. And now let's see how that looks. I'm going to do a preview here. And we can see it can probably do it being a bit brighter. So let's try 2. Right, that's quite a nice glow there to be fair. So that's good. Let's just zoom in. I can actually see that edge, which is not something I want. So what I'm going to do, because I believe there's displacement, so it's making there be a gap in this edge. So what I'm going to do in this archway, I'm going to select this bit. I'm going to hold down Alt, click on these faces and do Alt S and just scale these up just until that edge disappears. So scale that up. Okay, so that's good. So now there is going to be a gap there and we can see the light behind it. So that fixes that. Okay, fantastic. This is looking really artistic, really nice. So now let's work on the outside section. We're going to add the materials and then we can start adding assets and it's going to completely bring the whole thing to life. So then what we're going to do now is find the material for the outside. I think the outside material is actually going to be the same as this one. So Control L, link materials. But in this case, I'm actually going to add the color back to it. So first of all, let's make it some nice quads. We can't actually see this part, but let's do that anyway, just in case we're going to do a shot from outside. And there we go. And this side's more unnecessary, but never mind. Now then, I'm going to press A, and then let's go over to this one so we can see that one here and go to UV editor. Now, if I press U and then unwrap that, it's not going to be very straight. That's simply because we have this corner part here. So what we have to do is actually add some seams. So I'm going to mark these as a seam. Mark seam. And that does work a bit better. I'm actually going to grab these edges as well and see if I can get this bit completely straight. Mark seam, A-U, unwrap. There we go. So that's now completely straight. And as I mentioned before, because this is going to be a brick texture, if I go to material preview, let's actually give that a new version because this one's going to have some color. And shader editor. And let's plug this back in like this. Right then, so let me just show you this. Let's scale this up by 4 times. So let me actually show you. Let me remove these seams and then press U and unwrap. We can see at these corners, the bricks are not going straight. So that's what I was talking about. We need to make sure that these elements are straight. So with these seams created, it's created a very straight element there. So now I can rotate this all by 90 degrees. And now we have some bricks there. So I'm going to scale this up so we can see roughly that amount. And bring this down just so that we have the bottom edge here. And then these ones are going to go around the corner. So let's see how this looks from the camera view in render preview. Okay, I think it looks fine. I don't really like this edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring this up a little bit to get rid of it and bring that down. So this bottom edge is at the bottom. And there we go. So now it looks like the bricks are also going around the back. So what I also need to do is add adaptive subdivision to this object too. So let's add a subdivision surface, adaptive, and now that's going to be displacing a little bit better. So let's go back out of here. And now I need to add some more materials. Let's turn this to simple. There we go. And for this one, I'm going to add a new material. I'm going to go to iMesh again. I'm going to look for, there's one that was like a tiles. So this one here, I'm going to download that. All right then, so I'm going to just click on this one. I don't need 4K. We're hardly going to see this material. We could probably get away with 1K or 2K. So I'm actually going to just do 2K for now. And then that object, that has now been added. So I'm going to go to local view, press A, U, unwrap. And then we've got that object unwrap. And then I'm going to go to material preview. Okay, now for this one does also have displacement involved as well, but I'm going to remove that for now because we're hardly going to see this one. So keep things a bit more optimized, and then we could just and then I could just scale this up until roughly I think that it kind of fits. So I'm actually going to do it something like this, so the edge goes along the edge of the pool, which would probably be quite realistic, and also this edge matches as well. That actually worked out pretty good, so that's good. Let's come out of here. This pool material, let's press A, U, unwrap. Yeah, let's just do unwrap. Let's try minimum stretch, and then what I'm going to do is give it the same material as the walls. Link material, and that's good. So what I want to do now is add the pool water. So what I'm going to do is click on this object, go tab 3, click on this one, and then do Shift D, Z, bring that up like that. And then I'm going to press P to separate that. So then with this pool water created, what I'm going to do now is go to the materials, remove that one, and we're going to add a brand new material. I also want this to be mostly quads as well. So let's do something like this, and let's just subdivide it. Right then, I am going to be using a preset material again from iMesh on these glasses. I also realized we actually need to make sure the glass appears here, so I'll get that done. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose this green edge glass preset, because that will allow me to create quite a cool effect with this pool. So I'm just going to add it to this object. And let me actually get this pool so we can do some previews. So this is basically going to be adding some absorption, or the deeper it goes, the deeper the color. So if I go to render preview, we'll be able to see at the edges, it's going to be less color, but the further down it gets, it's going to be more color. To make this more prominent, what I'm going to do is add some steps to this pool. So I'm just going to let's grab an edge, which is already done for me. Let's just do this. And select this bottom edge, Shift D, bring this up, E to extrude that down. Let's actually go to the side view, do Control L. I'm just going to duplicate it. I'm just going to make some really rough stairs, something like this. Let's scale these up a little bit so they fit. Right then, and let's just do Shift N to make sure all the normals are facing the right way. Now if I go to render preview, we can see now that the top step is lighter, and the further down you get, the deeper the color. Now, this is how usually pool water looks. If you were, for example, to turn off absorption and to instead just give it a color, you can see that it's just a completely even color going all the way through. So by using absorption, that allows you to get a much more realistic result. So let's choose 10. I'm also going to choose maybe a different color. These steps, I don't really like them like that. Let's bring them down a little bit further. Because the top step is just a little bit too bright. So let's bring this down like that. Right. Okay, then for the color, I'm going to choose like a turquoisey kind of color like this. And that looks good. And make sure the base color is pure white. That's good. And I think that looks good. So this glass also comes with some warp involved as well. So if I increase the strength of that, which is using basically a bump map, or we can use displacement. We have made quads. So if we need to have real bumps, so let's say we see it from an angle and we need to see these actually going up and down, we can add displacement. Let me show you how to create this shader really quickly. It's super easy. Glass BSDF, plug that into there. And then all I'm going to do is add a absorption. Oh, sorry, principled volume. And for the color, I'm just going to give it this color, drag that into the volume. And there we go. Basically got the same thing. So to add the warp, this is basically, let's just go into here. We have this noise texture, and that's going into a bump map. The factor is going into the height, and the height is going into the normal maps. So that's basically all the warp is. But it's obviously easier when there's a preset one already done for you. So let's just use that. Okay, another cool thing that we can do with this pool is actually add some real caustics. So I don't believe this works with the normal map, with this warp, but we'll have a look. I think I might need to add some real displacement. So caustics is basically those nice glowing lights patterns on the bottom of a pool caused by the ripples in the water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this lamp. I'm going to say cast shadow caustics in the lamp properties. On this object, I'm going to go to object data properties. I'm going to go down to shading, caustics, receive caustics. Then on this glass object, I'm going to say cast shadow caustics. So firstly, there is a limitation inside of Blender, and that is caustics doesn't work, unfortunately, when a volume is involved. Now, this is a bug report that has been mentioned, and they are aware of it, I believe. So hopefully by the time you watch this video, this will work. But for now, we have to turn off this, and we still can't see anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add let's copy these nodes. Let's copy these ones here. And I'm going to turn the strength off here and do Control V, paste it into here. I'm going to add a displacement modifier. I'm going to add a subdivision modifier. Oh, we don't need bevel on that glass. I'm going to add a subdivision modifier, click adaptive. I'm going to go to the material properties, and I'm going to go to displacement only. And I'm going to set the displacement to be simple. And then what I'm going to do is plug this factor into the height and then this into displacement. So now we can see some crazy ripples happening. That's maybe a little bit too strong. So let's increase this to maybe like 10 and then maybe to 0.05. And there we go. We can already start to see some caustics appearing. We do need to make sure the shadow amount is to full. And then we can like rotate this down so we can see more into the glass. And we can also change this to be like this kind of color. So something like this. And now we can start to see some really, really lovely caustics appearing in this pool. So this is going to take a little bit longer to render, and we won't even see it from the camera angle. Maybe we might see something here, but in general, we could probably have this turned off because that will slow things down a little bit. And this probably is a little bit too high. We can probably do 0.03, a little bit of waves like that, and see how that looks. We can probably add a bit more detail to this, maybe like 2. And that's going to add a bit more randomness to this. Maybe try 10. And then maybe I can just reduce this to maybe 0.03, just a little bit less. But let's go back a little bit. Let's put this sun lamp back to where it was. I think that's probably fine. Let's just reduce this to 0.03. There we go. So I don't think we're even going to see these caustics from the camera angle, but it's just good to know that that's how you can do it. Let's leave that there like that. I do also want maybe this water just to go a bit closer to the edge. Okay. And in this case, leaving it with displacement rather than the warp actually works a little bit better. So that's good. Maybe this is still a little bit too strong from this point. So just to speed things up, I am going to turn this off. I don't think we're going to need it. And I do believe it will slow things down a little bit. So let's just cast caustics and turn this off to receive caustics. And then I can also add back the absorption, which I think looked nicer anyway. So let's turn this off. Right then, maybe a little bit too green. Now there is actually a way to make the caustics appear by default and actually with the absorption, and I'm going to cover that a little bit later because it's something which I don't think people talk about very much, but it's an incredible tool to know exists. Right then, that's really nice. So we do have the tiles. I don't think we need displacement at this point. We can check that out a little bit later if we wanted to. Now, one extra detail, if you did want to, you could actually make this tile and this stone one object. You could do a texture paint there and you can try to blend these together, or add some plaster there or something in this, some extra detail in the bottom here to blend the two materials, now that you know texture painting and how powerful that is. Okay, and then one thing I want to do is I do want to add one more light. Let's just duplicate this one and put that one just inside this element here and scale that up like so. So we get a nice edge light there. It's a little bit dark, this one, so maybe let's increase that so they're all about the same brightness. Something like that. That works. And maybe a bit more. We might need to reduce this because we are going to add a curtain here and some door elements. And if they look too bright, we might need to change it, but that works. So now I think we're in an incredibly good place. And we can also add them here if we wanted to, but I kind of like having it different from the rest. I can explore that a little bit later. But for now, what we're going to do is add some assets. Now, assets in architectural visualization is incredibly important. You couldn't even imagine trying to build every single asset yourself. It would take you hours and hours, days and days to create just one scene. Every studio, every professional will use preset assets. Like the analogy I always say, you never ask a photographer to do interior photography. You don't ask them to build all the furniture themselves either. They will go and hire their own furniture or buy their own furniture to fill the scene. So that is the same case. We're basically photographers at this point. We are not modelers. So that's when a library like iMesh comes in. So this is obviously going to be quite iMesh heavy at this point. So I'd highly recommend you check out iMesh. If you want to complete the scene completely like I'm doing it, it will cost you $17 to get access to all 2,500 assets. It just goes on and on and on. And they're all incredibly high detail. So this item is one of my favorites. And it's basically a woven chair. And it just goes into a hell of a lot of detail, and this is all included. We also have some cars. We have incredibly high detail plants, and all of these elements put together can create any scene that you want. So, and of course, this is all included in the 2,500 assets. Not only that, we also have all these materials, as I mentioned. We also have geometry nodes. We've got these brand new roof generators, which is incredible. And you can basically create any roofs. It adds moss and everything as well for you. So there we go. If you want to follow along exactly, then follow iMesh. There are free resources online which has a selection of freebies that you could probably use, but obviously I'd recommend iMesh. It was more expensive in the past, but we reduced it to $17 per month because we just wanted more people to have access to it. We didn't want there to be such a bridge to be able to even follow a tutorial like this. So hopefully $17 allows a lot more people to get access to this and to just give ArchViz a try. Let's work on let's work on these scenes. So the first elements I want to add is maybe windows and architectural elements. So I want to add like a little ridge going along here and a window in the back. And then we can start adding the big main furniture. And we're also going to need to model that desk, some chairs and things like that. So we have the library available here. So that's what we're going to be doing. So then let's get going. The first thing I want to do is add a window. So I'm going to go to architectural and windows. So let's have a look here. Windows. And I believe we have or maybe it's under doors. I apologize because it's a sliding door. It's not a window. And we want to use this one here. So I'm going to shift right click here and I'm just going to drop that into place. Right then, so with this object in, I'm just going to scale it a little bit, move it roughly into place. And then I'm just going to go with all of it selected, edit mode, and I'm just going to select these top edges. Oh, my screencast keys, it keeps turning off. Hopefully I've not missed too much without that. So there we go. Let's press GZ and bring this all the way up. And I'm actually going to find that here. That's being put into lighting. So I'm going to move these to scene collection, and then we can deal with these a little bit later. Let's just make sure we're in this scene collection. Right, Shift G collection. Right then, let's just make sure that this top edge is just at the top, like so. And then I can just scale this on the X-axis. Just roughly into place. Now that will obviously mean that these edges are thinner than the top edge. So let's just select these faces here and scale these like so. And same for these as well. Just so they're roughly the same size. And let's just do a cursor here and let's click this button and do SX just to scale it roughly into the size of the window. So there we go. So this comes with all the elements that you need. So we have these parts. Let's maybe bring this over a little bit more and then scale this on the X-axis. There's more width on these as well. Maybe. So let's just select all these and SX, and then we could do these ones as well. It's just SX. Now, right then, so we got that element created. I'm then going to click on this frame. I'm going to go to materials. I'm going to click white plastic marked, and I'm going to give it a black material. So never go 100% black. Always just make sure you go a little bit off. I would choose something like this. Pure black doesn't really exist in real life. So except for some 99.99% materials that are being created, but most objects will have some sort of they won't be completely black. So there we go. So I can also go to viewport if you wanted to and change that to be black to represent a bit more accurately. Okay, that looks good. Let's slide this door over so that's closed, and then we're going to open this one, something like this. Okay, and we can actually see the HDRI now through the glass, and that's simply because if I go to my iMesh tab, go to local, click on HDRIs, I just click refresh on that, and we can click on just any of these. We can see that we have background replace. We also have glass replace. So let's just choose one again here. We will actually add a background in a bit, but for now, let's just do that so there's no distractions. Now for this, this glass, I'm actually going to use this updated shader because this has been updated ever so slightly. So I'm going to click on this one, click apply, and click on this one, click apply. Then click on both, edit mode, and then under the materials tab, let's go down and click select. So we select the glass thin. And then I'm going to click on this one and click assign. And that one should have a little bit less noise than the previous one. This has just been slightly updated. Basically, the main update was this one here. So shadow ray going into reflection ray, and that goes to a maximum. It's a math node. And you can set that to be maximum. Then just add a principal shader. I'm going to set that to be pure white. If you don't obviously have an iMesh subscription, it's just good to know. Roughness maybe 0.02, and then transmission to 1, and then a mix shader. Plug this one into there, and then plug this one into there. And then I'm going to add a transparent BSDF, plug that into here, and then put that to the output. And that's basically the node that I've got. So let me just undo this because I actually want it to be just this node group that's already created. And yeah, so basically this glass shader, this glass shader is a more updated version and it has less noise. So if I go back and then assign this one, we can see there's more noise coming into the scene here, which is not as nice. So I'll be using this one going forwards. We will try to update these windows to have that updated version. But for now, if you do add any interior glass, I'd recommend just using this interior glass one or using that node setup I just showed you. So there we go. We have some windows. Now then, for this next part, I do want to add a little element going along here, basically like a metal edge to the step, and I'm going to cheat. So we already have some geometry here, which looks pretty good. I think that this could probably be used for that edge over there. So I'm going to go into edit mode. I'm going to click on this object, do Control L, do Shift D, Enter P to separate that. Now we have a nice metal edge. So let's bring this over there and bring this over to this edge. I'm just going to add like a little bit of an edge overlap, and then that should add a little bit of nice shadow on that edge. And then in edit mode, let's press 1 and to bring this over there like that. Just not so it's completely touching, just a little bit of a gap. And then same thing over here. Press point on the number pad and to bring that over, something like that. So now we have a nice little element. So that's probably the most architectural elements done. Let's work on this shelf. So let's go into wireframe mode. We can see there's a shelf going to be here. So I'm going to do go to edit mode, press 1, click on this object, do Shift S, cursor selected, and then I'm going to do Shift A. I'm going to add single vert, and then press E, Y, and snap that to this edge. EX, EY, and then EX. This element's probably going to be going into the wall because of the displacement, but let's just bring this out like that. So I'm going to press EY, select the second one, press F, and then we have this desk. So getting my trusty tape measure out, we can see that the desk is about 76 centimeters high or a little bit higher. So with this whole thing selected, I'm just gonna bring this up to the floor level. And then I'm gonna press GZ 0.75. I'm gonna press F, and then I'm just gonna press E and bring that down like this. We can see the normals are facing the wrong way. So press A, Shift N, and now we have a nice desk. Let's add some bevel. We already had some bevel created on this wall element. So Shift, click on here, Control L, copy modifiers. Now we have some nice bevel. Let's do shade auto smooth and make sure that we have shading harden normals. And then I'm going to reduce this to 0.0025. There we go. And then I'm going to press A, U, unwrap, sorry, Smart UV unwrap. And then we can add some wood to that in a bit. So that looks like it's going to be good. And what I like to work with on the assets are going to be working from the bigger ones, getting smaller and smaller until we get to the details where we can fine tune all these elements. So we want to work with, firstly, with a bed. So I'm going to use a bed model. You can obviously learn fabric simulation if you want, but these beds were made in Marvelous Designer, which is a little bit more accurate, and you can get some really nice beds. So I'm going to go to beds and let's find one we like. I'm going to use this one. Yeah, something like this. And I'm going to rotate that minus 90 degrees and put that into place. So I don't actually want this bed frame, so I'm going to delete that. Now we have this this wall. Let's bring this over, and this bed is actually quite large. So the good thing about fabric objects is that you can actually scale them, and quite often they don't look scaled. So that looks good. So how wide is this now? So I probably want something about there. So it's about 2 meters wide, which is quite average, with a little bit extra for the fabric bits on the side. So that's quite nice. I'm going to do Shift S, cursor selected. Shift A, I'm going to add a cube, and I'm going to scale that down. I'm going to make a very quick bed frame like that. And let's bring this bottom element up. I'm going to bring it to the floor, but for these kind of objects, I do always like there to be a little air gap. When an object is completely touching it, it feels a little bit strange to me, but adding a little bit of a gap adds like a black edge along these objects, which feels more natural. And bring that down, something like this. Let's bring this out as well. This is fine, I think, just to go into the wall. I don't think we'll see that bit element anyway. And then I'm going to press I, and then I'm just going to insert that down. So now it looks like the bed is going into the wood. We already have a bevel modifier created, so I'm just going to do Control L, copy modifiers. I'm always reusing elements all the time, if you haven't been able to tell. Let's bring this out actually, something like this. I think maybe that's going to be fine. It is probably going to go into the wall in a second. So let's just preview that. Let's do a render preview. I'm going to turn off face orientation and let's just preview this part here. And just make sure that the displacement isn't going through it. So that works pretty well. So now we have this shelf and this created. I am going to add some wood to the scene. I love to reuse the same materials as much as possible. So I'm going to add one of the woods to one object and then copy it for the other wooden objects. So I'm going to go press N. I'm going to go to iMesh. I'm going to find a wood material. Again, if you have some others online that you'd like to use, then of course use that. But my one I want to use is called Gladstone Beige. So I'm going to click on this one. I'm just going to apply the 4K. We don't necessarily need the 4K. I think 2K is also going to be more than enough. So you can click 2K if you wanted to, or even 1K. I'm going to do 4K for now because I know I'm probably going to be using the Simplify in a second anyway, which will greatly simplify, which will reduce this anyway. If you are struggling for VRAM, if you have quite a small GPU, I'd recommend just going for 1K. You really are not going to be able to tell the difference. You know what? Let me do it. I'm going to do 1K here. So let's apply 1K here. Right then, so let's press Tab, A, U, Smart UV Unwrap. And same for this one. Let's go and click on this and do Control L, Control L, copy materials. And then I'm going to do material preview. And we can see we have a wood material. So obviously the texture is too big. So I'm going to maybe try something like 4. And that looks quite nice. I love the lines in this. But now let's go to the render preview. And I think I might just desaturate this ever so slightly. So hue saturation and do just 0.85 to take away a little bit of a color so it merges a bit more with the scene. And I always find myself doing render previews basically all the time. I think I'm addicted to it, but I feel like I'm always tweaking and tweaking and tweaking. So right then, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of a bedside table. So what I'm going to do here is just a shift right click and add a cube. It's going to be a very simple one. Let's just bring this like this, bring this into place. like that. Scale this on the Z axis. I'm going to bring this up ever so slightly. And then I'm going to do Control L, copy materials, sorry, link materials and copy modifiers. And then I'm going to go into edit mode, press 3. I'm going to inset this. Oh, sorry, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to press Control A and apply the scale. And then I'm going to press I. I'm going to inset. I'm going to press I again. Then I'm going to inset that, extrude, sorry, to this edge. And I think that's going to be more than enough detail. This is just going to appear as a black edge. Maybe I can bring that back ever so slightly. We're never going to see inside here. This is going to be black. So this is almost like a push cabinet. You push it and it opens, just very minimal. And we're going to do Smart UV Unwrap again. And I'm going to click on all these objects. And actually, to make sure all the UVs are consistent throughout, I'm going to press Smart UV Unwrap with them all selected. And then I can do material preview and check this out. And there we go. So now we know all the materials are going to be, all the wood is going to be to the same size. Right, I'm then just going to go to viewport color and just give it just like a brown color so we can tell the difference. Right then, next thing I want to do is I'm going to add a carpet. So I'm going to go to models. I'm going to go to furniture details, and I'm going to add this one here. This is quite a high detail rug, as you can see. So I'm actually going to go to subdivision modifier. I'm going to turn off, this will turn on during the render, but I think that's going to add too much polygons. Unless we're going to do a nice close-up, I really don't think we're going to need it. So that's fine. Let's come out of here and let's just put this roughly into place. This is going to be roughly for this desk area. And then I also want it down here as well. But because this has a lot of geometry, I don't want to duplicate this, because if we see down here, we have face count. If I do Shift D, the faces go up. So if I delete that, there's almost a million polygons on its own. So to do Alt D means that the polygon count stays the same. If you don't have this details, go to Edit, Preferences, Interface, go to status bar, and then we have all these here. I just have them all enabled. It just gives you a lot of statistics about the scene. So select this one and do Alt D, put it roughly into place, rotate that 90 degrees. And that means that the object, basically the data from the object is being duplicated. So it only needs to be calculated once. So I'm gonna put that roughly into place. And I'm just gonna see from the camera preview how much we can see. Maybe a bit more of a gap between the step. So basically visually, I want this to be symmetrical. If it was like this, I feel like it's more visually pleasing if it's the same distance. And maybe just over like this. Right then, now I'm gonna shift right click onto here, onto the top of the rug. And now I can add a chair. And the thing is, I've already done this scene, so I know the furniture that I want. So this is a very beige rock scene, so I feel like a wicker kind of chair like that will work really well. And I actually know the one I want to use, so I'm going to find, it might be called something else. Let me just go to seating. It will be there actually. Let's go seating chairs, and let's just try to find it. This one here. So I'm going to append that one to the scene. I'm going to scale it up ever so slightly, rotate it. So this looks good. Again, I'm going to hold down Shift, click on this one, do Control L, and link materials. I want them to have the same material because I think that'll look nice. Maybe I push this a little bit more into the chair, into the desk, sorry, and over like that. Right then, so now what I want to do is the next big item is going to be the bath in the back. So if I go to the top, we can see that the bath is basically going to go here. So I'm just going to do Shift right click. I'm going to press N. I'm going to go to bathroom, sorry, and then click on baths. And then I'm just going to use this one. So I'm going to click append, and we could maybe download, I could just download all of them. I mean, if you wanted to test all of them, you can. So these will start downloading. So then what I'm going to do, this one is now appended. So I'm going to rotate that 90 degrees and put that roughly into place. So from the camera's view, I just want to be able to see, yeah, I think that's a really lovely detail. So I'm going to go to this object and I'm going to select this outer face because this has a different material. I want this to be white. So I'm going to select. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove this and give this a nice white material, something like this. And let's see how rough it is. Maybe it's a little bit too rough. What we can do is add a Shift A, add a math node, and make this more glossy by multiplying by a lower number. So that basically brings it to black, but that looks good. Okay, so now we have the bath. Now I want to add the curtain. So there's something I want to do a little bit different for this curtain, and that's actually doing subsurface. So in the past, a lot of the iMesh curtains actually need to be updated because I think that it is more pleasing to do the shader in a slightly different way. So I'm just going to append this one to the scene, and I'm just going to go into edit mode. You can use this blowing one if you like, but I'm just going to grab one of these, go into edit mode, just delete all of this because we're not going to need it. Delete that right then, and delete this as well. So this shader, actually, maybe we can do a comparison before and after. So let's bring this roughly into place, bring this up slightly, and I'm going to scale this on the x-axis, bring this over on the y-axis. It is going through the bath, so what I'm going to need to do, I'm just going to scale this on the y-axis. So fabric objects are usually quite forgiving in terms of scaling, and it's still going through the bath. So in edit mode, I'm going to press 1, click on this, I'm going to press O, and then bring that over here, just like this, just so it looks like it's being pulled over by the bath. Maybe this looks a bit too unrealistic, maybe a bit more. Right, that looks a bit better. So then let's do a comparison. So we have the first object, and this is how it looks. This is something I think you should probably take forwards with the other projects as well, because I do think it looks better. So we have, let's just see how this looks. So this is the default shader. And we can already see that we're starting to hit some VRAM limits due to all the textures in the scene. So simply for viewport performance, I'm going to enable simplify. I'm going to set the texture limit to just be 512, and that should help things along. So let's do render preview. Okay, so this is basically how that curtain is looking. So let's make a second one. Let's duplicate this over here. And for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a solidify modifier. So I'm going to add solidify, and I'm just going to do a very small thickness, 0.0001, because curtains are generally very thin, maybe even 0.002 or maybe 3. You can also add some extra subdivisions to it as well. So that's going to be the curtain. Let's actually also select this edge and this edge, do Shift D. And for this one, I'm also going to set the offset to be 0, and this one offset to be 0. And then I'm just going to increase this to maybe 0.001 to make it thicker. Okay, so we have this material here. All I'm going to do is make a new version of that. And then what I'm going to do is just remove all this, plug in the Prince board into the end. I'm going to remove this base color. And then I'm going to go to sheen, weight to 1, roughness to 1. Then I'm going to go to subsurface because we have thickness now. So the translucent shader is usually very good for 2D objects like leaves or things like that. And this was a 2D object, so translucent does a pretty good job. But I want to use, because there's now thickness, I'm going to use some subsurface. Set that to be 1.1, and now we can try to compare the difference. So this is the old shader and the new one. We can see here that there's quite harsh shadows, and this one feels a lot softer to me. This might be preference, but to me, this one feels more realistic. So anyway, up to you what you want to do. So I'm going to delete this one, bring this over, so it's just like that. And also, because I added this extra edge, so I'm added some thickness here, we can also see that there is an extra edge on here, which to me also adds a bit more realism to this. How we did the curtains, it seems like that's how most people did curtains, and this added new element and using subsurface is something which I've recently been exploring, so I'll try to also update these as well. That's also the benefit with using iMesh. If I update them, you'll actually get an update button, so you can actually just directly update it and then get the fresh version. So I'm always trying to think of ways to improve the assets, and when we do, you can then just update. Okay, so this is looking fantastic. Now we can start going into the smaller details, like all the decorations here, a couple of lamps, some small decorations here, some plants, and then the outdoor area. And then we're good to start rendering and do some composition. There is one thing I want to adjust here though, and I want to bring out some of the detail in this area to see if I can bring some displacement coming out of this. because it's a little bit too soft for me. So I'm going to go into local view for this. And then for the plaster, let's see if I can just increase the scale of this. So 0.2, let's try that. Okay, something like 0.2, let's try 0.3. And I'm just going to increase the scale. I think these bumps are a little bit too high. Let's try something like 6 maybe. Okay. And then we can see that there's like this creasing around the edge because it's basically going inside itself. As you can see, if I increase that, it's just going to go further and further back as well. So I do need to adjust the mid-level. So let's just bring this back a little bit. Something like that. And there we go. So we still get quite a nice sharp edge there. And now this wall is looking more rough. Now for this particular wall, I do want it to be a little bit more rough than the wall, than the roof and the ceiling. Even though it is the same material, I just want this area to be a little bit more interesting. I think that just having some extra cuts and things can make that focus a little bit more interesting. I do want to do a render of this shot anyway, so bringing that out can look quite nice. If you wanted to, of course, you can select the roof and ceiling and give it the same amount of displacement. But for me, for some reason, this feels like this should be its own focus. Like it's a bit more of obviously a little bit more of a broken wall, and I think that should just be how it is. Right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to add some more lighting, just so we can get an idea of how this room is going to feel, and then we can add some smaller decorations. So I'm just going to shift right click up here, and my screencast keys have gone again. So let's turn these back on, and let's go to iMesh. I'm going to go to lamps, lighting, ceiling pendants, and then I'm just going to try to find the one which I wanted to use. Let's bring this out. Okay, and it's these ones here. So I'm going to append this one to the scene, and I'm going to go into edit mode, and we're going to select these. And I'm going to select this and delete this one as well. So for this light, I think it has a material. Let me just turn this on completely. This is a special node shader that was created basically to make the outer edge shine less. And that felt to me more realistic. It was kind of like a fake shader for glass. So the alternative would be to have an actual semi-translucent material for the glass and then have a light source in the middle. But that is a lot more intensive on the render time. So doing a fake shader like this speeds things up a little bit. But this is not going to be what's emitting light into the scene. We're actually going to be using a point light. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select this bottom edge, Shift S, cursor selected, do Shift A, and then I'm going to add a lamp, and I'm going to add a point light. Now it's very, very small. So let's just increase the radius. And then I'm just going to bring this down a little bit. What I want to do is add an IES light, which should just shine light straight to the ground. If we can still see this illumination here, then I might move it again, because I want to fake the light coming into the scene from this light in a much more interesting way. So I'm going to click Use Nodes. I'm going to do Shift A, IES. There we go. And then you can go to this website here called IES Library, which has hundreds of thousands of light sources. I've talked about this before, but please do save this to your library, because you can get some really incredible lighting that looks like this simply from one point light. So all you need to do is browse the one that you like. Simply just go to any of these, down whatever you like, and then add it as the IES. So I'm going to find that one now. You just click External and click Open and find that file. And once I've selected that, I'm going to plug that into the strength. And there we go. So I was correct that it's not actually going to be shining any light upwards. So that looks fine. And I do want it just to be down so it's not actually being stopped by this light bulb. So let's see how this looks in the scene. I will bring this light down in a second. I just want to preview this IES light. Okay, and I think that looks pretty good. We've got like a darker section here, and it gets lighter, like there's an extra rim kind of simulation here. So that looks good to me. I'm now going to add a Shift A and type in black body. And again, you can probably imagine the temperature we're going to use, 3800. I think this is a little bit too bright, so I'm going to try 0.05. And this is probably going to be enough illumination for this kind of light bulb. So what we want to do now is just bring this down. So I'm going to bring the whole thing down, GZ, something like this. And then I'm going to go to edit mode and just bring this up to the ceiling. So bring this up, maybe turn off proportional editing. Let's bring this up like this. Press point on the number pad and just make sure it goes to like here. Right then with this selected, I can bring that over a little bit and then do Alt D and bring that over so it's kind of sitting over here. We can go to the front view, just make sure that looks, that looks realistic. And now I can do more of a preview. Okay, and that's gorgeous. So this is looking really nice. This is such a nice vibe going on here. Now, in general, I do think this whole area looks great, but I think I might want some more light coming into the scene, maybe from this direction. So there is a door here, and we might add a door frame. I think I said that we will, but if we're not going to see it, I might not waste the time with it. But as there is a door, we could maybe suggest that there might be some light coming in from an open door. So let's say the door is open. We could say some light is coming in from that direction. So what I can do is add a Shift A and add a light, an area light, and then I could just bring it over here and point it to the bed. And then reduce this to maybe like 5. And now we can see we have a bit more illumination here. I have it set to white because what I'm just trying to suggest is maybe the door is open and there's some more natural style light coming in there. Now, if I move it off, we can see the room in that section gets a lot darker. So if I bring it back, that light comes in there. So now this feels better illuminated to me, and having it slightly off from the camera. So from like this direction means that we get some nice shadows that we can see from that light as well. If we had it, for example, what I mean is if we had it this way facing directly from behind the camera, it's going to basically remove the shadows because we're seeing it from the same direction as the camera. So whenever I try to add some lights, I'm always trying to make sure that it is off from the camera so that there's some contrast produced somewhere else. Now, there's another little thing I want to do at this stage as we are starting to get finalized with the lighting, is something I like to add, and that's called a negative fill or a black backdrop, which is often used in photography to bring more contrast into the scene. So I'm going to shift right click here and Shift A. I'm going to add a mesh and a plane and rotate it and then scale it up. And it doesn't need to be that big, just, you know, just roughly so it covers this whole back wall. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a new material. I'm going to set it to be completely black. I'm going to make it 100% rough with no specular. And what that will do is it will eliminate any chances that any light coming in and bouncing off the back wall will come and hit this part again, because I want it to be completely black. So that should add some more contrast here. So the back of the room gets more dark, these elements get darker. And this can be quite an interesting trick in a few renders when you just want to add a little bit more contrast. I don't think it's making much of an impact in this scene. I think the back wall is already quite dark anyway, but that is just something I do like to add if I want to add contrast. So that's fine. I'm actually going to set that to be in the viewport as display as bounds so that we can see through it so it doesn't really take up much space. So what I want to do now is go and start adding those decorations. So I'm going to add a little something onto this table. So I'm going to do Shift right click here, press N. I'm going to go to decorations. I'm then going to go to decorative sets. Decor sets, and this is probably one of my most favorite categories. We really spent a hell of a lot of time making a hell of a lot of different sets, which instantly bring life to your scene. So so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find the one which I wanted to use, which will fit into the scene nicely. So let's find, it's this one here. So if I just click append, the whole set will append. There we go, and we can now go into this object. Let's bring it just slightly up, just so that, like I said, there's just a bit of an air gap between these objects. And let's rotate this 90 degrees, something like this. I can then scale it a bit. It really doesn't matter if you scale things ever so slightly, unless there's a tape measure put into the render. You probably won't be able to tell that this is not quite to scale. Let's Shift S, select by collection, and just scale that again. Right, something like that. So I want to bring this glass over, because what I imagine is if they've had a drink, they've probably put the glass here so they can actually get the water, and that looks good. And yeah, so the rest is all done for you. So let's bring this whole thing over. Let me bring that over like that. And actually, in this case, I might actually make this a little bit bigger, because what I really want to see is I do want to see these decorations here. So as this is my own render and I have designed it myself, I am going to design this cabinet myself as well. So let's bring that over. Let's bring the whole thing closer to the side. like so. And actually let's bring this whole thing over like this, and then bring this cut back, just so I can try to get this in there as well, because I think these are really nice details. Right, let's see that. Okay, so we can see that, and that's going to be some nice details. So that's good. Now I'm going to shift right click on here, press N, and you can add really anything at this point. I just thought it's quite interesting to add like a MacBook. So let's press 2. Let's try to find it here. Append laptop. It comes with an open one and a closed one. I'm only going to want the closed one, the open one, sorry. And we also have a screen image, and this is going to illuminate. So if I do a render preview, it's going to be like this, but I want it just to be black. I don't want it to distract from the scene. So what I'm going to do is just take this off and also turn off the emission no, and then instead of red, just bring this like something like this. And you can see we've added some pretty nice textures onto this actually. So this looks good. Right then. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go back into the scene and just try to place it in the right place. Just to make sure there is actually touching correctly. That's nice. I'm just going to rotate this. Let's do it from the camera view so we can actually do it correctly. Always try to make sure it always looks good from the camera's point of view. So if you decorate a whole scene, then go to camera preview, there's probably a good chance I'm going to move things anyway. So I always try to make sure that it's going to look good in the camera's view. So let's check this out. Something like that. And now there is some empty space down here, which I do want to fill in. So usually if there's some big empty space, some item will look good. There is actually some really interesting architectural elements built into the texture itself. But as this whole area kind of feels a little bit empty, I do want to add something here. So I'm going to press N. I'm going to go to plants, and we've released these bouquets, which is some of my favorite assets we've released for a long time. And I think I'm going to add this one in here, and then I'm just going to scale it up to be bigger. I'm going to go to top view and just rotate this direction. Okay, bring it to the wall, maybe scale it up some more, and something like this. So let's go to vases, and I want to add, I think it is going to be this one here. So let's pen that to the scene, and let's bring this over. I'm going to do Alt P, both of them. I'm going to do Alt P and click on Keep Transform. They're both parented to this, but I just want to have one of them. Let's maybe bring this one over. Actually, I'm going to bring this one outside. Shift to S, cursor to selection to cursor, sorry. I just bring this over here like this, just like some decorative vase. You can decorate this more if you like, but this scene is quite minimal, and just one vase there kind of felt appropriate for this seating area. Maybe the MacBook is inappropriate here, but for some reason for me it kind of felt nice. So let's go to this vase now, and let's go bring it over. I just want it to be like an outside vase, something like this. So now I do actually want to have some light just above the bathtub. So instead of bringing this whole light, I'm just going to bring this IES. I'm going to do Shift D, bring that over there, just bring it up a little bit. I don't know how this light's going to fall, and we could suggest that there is going to be some sort of light maybe just behind the wall. But as long as there's some light cast into the scene there, that would be fine. Let me just do a quick preview render. Okay, yeah, that's fine. I don't think there is like the suggestion of a light coming in here, and that for me is fine. I think that's enough coming in from that light. So that's good. Now what I want to do is just add a little bit of decoration just in front of the bath. So do Shift right click there. I'm going to go to, believe it's tables, and then a coffee table. And as you can probably tell, I've already worked in this scene a few times, so I know exactly the elements I want. I've been doing this for the last few weeks, so that's why I'm going straight to the items that I know I need. And when you decorate it, it's probably going to take a little bit longer. So this is the one I want. I'm going to append that to the scene. There we go. And this is a really gorgeous coffee table. So this is a new wood I'm introducing into the scene. So I just want to check that the colors are correct. Okay, and let me just check how it looks against this wood here. So I think that it's maybe got too much color in that. So I'm going to do Shift A, hue saturation. I'm going to put that to be 0.65. And then that should take the edge off of that color, and that so that fits better for me. So now I just want to add a little bit of decorations to the top. So I'm going to do a Shift right click on top, N, go to decorative sets again, decorations, decorative sets, and then let's just have a look through here. There was a set which I do know I want, and that's going to be, I think, this one. Let's append it to the scene. Some sort of bathroom elements. I mean, you can choose something else if you think it's more appropriate. Let's just bring that over there. Let's bring this down. I think that's fine actually. Yeah, that looks good. And then what I have here, I'm going to do shift right click here. I'm going to add a mirror. So let's go to decorations, mirrors, and I'm just going to append this one. And I'm just going to rotate this 90 degrees. And scale that up. So these mirrors actually, we've paid a little bit of more attention to these. I've added, as you can kind of see while it's rendering, maybe it's a bit too bright so you can't quite see. There is specks of dust on the actual mirror. So if we go to the mirror, you can actually see there is going to be specks of dust on there. But I think it's too bright so we can't actually see it here. But that mirror is going to work well. And then one final detail for this bathroom is going to be a radiator. So I'm going to go to architectural, I believe, radiators, and I'm just going to add this one. Okay, so let's add this radiator there and bring this over a little bit. And if your radiator is clipping through it, you can go into edit mode and you can do proportional editing to move it away from the radiator. But that works nicely there. And then I'm going to start working on the outdoor section. So let's do shift right click here because there is actually a pagoda going here. So I'm going to press N. Let's go to garden, and it's actually this one here. So this object doesn't fit, but I can do quite heavy scaling on this because this object has quite square elements and fabric, so it should be quite forgiving with the scaling. And I also want it to be tall enough that it kind of attaches to this wall. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring this over, just scale this like this, so that just until it fits in this space, right then. And then I can scale it on the Z axis. And let's see if it's touching the wall, like that. And scale it a little bit more, because the idea is this is going to go like this and it's going to attach to that wall. So let's grab this element and bring this up like that. It's like it's attached, and we might need to bring the whole thing up just ever so slightly, like so. And because we did scale it, I think the only bit that looks obvious is that this is this size and this is now this size. So if I go to the front view, obviously you can spend more time to make sure each element is actually the correct size, but I think this will be fine. Let's just grab all these and bring this over. Oh, turn off proportional editing. Okay, and that looks good. Let's bring it this just a little bit more over like that. Okay, and I think that's fine. From the camera's preview, actually, let's go to top view. I think that might be too far over. Shift G, select by collection, and let's scale this over like this. And I'm going to shift right click here. I'm going to click on this one and scale it on the y-axis just so it fits into there like that. Right then, so we've got the pagoda, and then what I'm going to do, pagoda. Anyway, now we want some day beds, so I'm just going to go to garden, day bed. I'm going to add this one here. I'm going to add the one which is going to look most interesting to the camera, and that's going to be the one that's sitting up. So let's delete this one. And then finally, on the decoration on top, I do want to add a magazine. So let's just type magazine. And click append. I'm only going to have one of these, so let's just use this one. And then I can just rotate it into place. Okay, like that. And then I can bring it up slightly. And there are some elements that are clipping through. So I'm going to go into edit mode. I could turn on proportional editing and then bring one side up like this. Let's turn this off. But you can see it kind of brings the whole thing over. I think it might look a bit more interesting if it only does the bits closest to it. So we can actually deform it in separate areas, something like that. Maybe bring this element down a bit. and this side up, and then this side down because it's hanging over the edge. We might actually could change it to sharp, and then this edge will go down a bit more. Okay, great. All right, and there is actually one extra detail which I completely forgot to talk about, and that is an architectural element, and that's going to be the ceiling lights. So that will finish off the scene, and then I believe there's just one more element I want to add here, and then I think that should finish off the scene. And actually, there's something I want to adjust here. So you see that these two elements are very close together. If this was like this, for me, that would be a big no-no, because we got this line, this vertical line, and it's completely overlaying the other vertical line, which for me is just not very nice to look at. So I always like there to be a little bit of a gap. And I do think the gap is just still not big enough. So if I stretch this like this, maybe bring that back over so it's under the curtain, that to me is better. There's just more space there for the radiator to have. And maybe it's a little bit too high. Let's bring this down a bit. Okay, so now let's work on the ceiling element, and this is basically going to be some ceiling square lights. So first of all, we need to make a little box, and we're going to use that to cut out a shape in the ceiling. So I'm going to do Shift right click, Shift A, I'm going to mesh a cube and scale that down. And I'm just going to do something like this for now. I need to actually add some spotlights, and that could be my guide for the size. So I'm just going to Shift right click here, press N, and can I just type spotlight? Maybe. And that's not actually the one I use. Maybe it's not called spotlight. Let's check lighting spotlights. It should be there. Okay, this one's called a downlight. So I'll append that one to the scene. And let's bring this down. And basically I want to have 3 in a row. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Alt D, like this, and then like this. And then let's grab these and the box and make sure that this all fits together. So let's bring this over here. And let's scale this box so it fits the light. I'm just going to doing this quicker and quicker. I'm noticing the time is starting to tick, and I don't want to get stuck on details which you guys can fix up if you wanted to. So something like that. And then I'm just going to insert this. Oh, let's actually come out there, Control A, apply the scale, then do I, and then E. Oops. Right, then bring that up like that. Let's bring this up. Right then, now I'm going to add some bevel to this. So I'm going to bevel modifier 1, 2, 3, and then bring this down to maybe 0.001, 0.0005. That's great. And I'm going to do shade auto smooth and then do shading harden normals. And then I'm going to Shift right click. Then I'm going to go Edit A, U, Smart UV Unwrap. And then I'm going to give it the same material. So this is called plastic. Let's actually give it the gloss. So click on this one and add this one there. So now we have this outer shell, and I do want to cut this out of the ceiling. So if I was to go, for example, let's select all these and bring this up. So I do want it to just be like this. And we do need to boolean it out. So if I was to do this now, it won't work. So let's just select this roof, click boolean, search for this one. We can see it's kind of trying to cut it out, but but it doesn't have a hollow edge. So I'm going to duplicate this object, Shift D. I'm going to go to edit mode. I'm going to select all this outer edge and this top edge, and then do Control I, X, F. I'm going to select this outer rim now and press F. And now we have a box which can work for boolean. I'm just going to do A, Shift N, just to make sure the normals are facing outwards. I do actually only want this one to be visible for the boolean and nothing else. So let me just actually bring this up a little bit, just so that when I do this, if I go to Object and go to Display Visibility and set it to Bounds, it's going to be easier to select that object because it's slightly higher now, and we won't see that part anyway. So that's great. So now if I go click on this object and then click boolean, boolean, and then I can select that object. We now have the hole for this. So now if I move that box anywhere, we're gonna get that hole moving around. So then with this outer edge box selected, and then I'm going to select the inside edge, and then going to go into camera preview, just make sure it's roughly in the right place. I think that's fine. I think I do want it to be a little bit bigger. So let's go top view and go into edit mode with both of them selected and just give it a little bit extra space there. And then I'm going to select this one, bring this over, then select this one and bring that one over as well. And you should probably make sure it is symmetrical. And okay, now then, with these two boxes selected, oops, I'm going to go into edit mode, select everything and do Shift D Y, something like this. And we can just check the hole has been created, because sometimes a Boolean can be a little bit janky and it won't work. So that's great. Now I'm going to do A, and then I'm going to go top view and then do Shift D and make another one over here. So I kind of want it to be like this pattern. I can select everything, maybe bring it over like that, and then go to camera preview and just check it's in the right place. I think that looks good. Maybe they can be a bit more spread out. So let's go top view on here and bring these back like this. So that's good. In that case, we have one over the bed, one at this pool, one at the desk, and one at the entrance. So that's great. So now I can select these lights. I'm actually going to select all of them and do move to the new collection. I'm just going to call it spotlight, just so it's easy to find. And that's perfect. Now what I'm going to do is do Alt D Y. And then press A, then do Shift G, select by collection, and then do Alt D X. Oh, it's actually just move them into place. Like so, and that should also be in the right place. Is that not? That is not. So let's do Shift G, select by collection. Let's deselect these because I think these need to be moved, or this one needs to be moved over anyway. So let's bring this over there like that. All right then. So now we have these lights. For this light bulb, I'm going to go to a shading, light linking, and I'm going to type spotlight because I only want these lights to influence the spotlight itself. I don't actually want these lights to cast any light into the scene, but what I do want to see is like some glow on the actual light, as if there's just some low emittance of light coming from there, but you can't actually see it emitting light into the scene. That is just a nice little detail I like to add. Of course, you can make it light into the scene if you wanted to, but I really don't think it's necessary. So now what I'm going to do is just make sure I go through all these lights and make sure that they are linked only to that spotlight collection. And I just realized there is one more thing we need to do with this box object. We do actually need to make sure that it doesn't actually show up in the render. So ray visibility, just turn all of these off so that you cannot actually see it. So now for the render preview, let's just see how this looks. So this light, for example, is not actually casting any light into the scene, although I do believe secondary bounces. So any light that hits this light is going to be cast into the scene. But if I set these all to be 100, the illumination in the room hasn't changed. And if I set them to be 0, again, the lighting will be the same, but the only difference is up here, we can actually see there's just a black hole there, and just having some sort of light coming in like that just adds some nice detailing, and I think that does look better. Even though it's not 100% physically accurate, just something going on does look good, and you can't actually tell in the final render that there's not actually light coming from that. And I have realized I did actually make a mistake. I was trying to wonder why the other lights wouldn't line up. These ones were actually broken. So, okay, so there we go. So now this looks very natural. Even though we have lights on here, the room is quite evenly lit at this point, especially from this area light coming in here. And we have these spotlights here and this one here. So it does kind of feel like they fit quite nicely. So this, for me, is almost approaching on completion. Now I just need to work on the backplate. So this is one of my favorite uses of AI. And is actually just backplates, because I just need an image. It just needs to be a very rough image of something in the background. It doesn't need to be anything specific. In this case, you know, this is quite a Mediterranean scene. So maybe there's like a hill going down there. I mean, we're on like some hillside or something. Anything that works. Obviously, if you're working for a customer, they might have a very specific background. But then even then, the amount of times I've done an interior for something in a European country, and the outside is going to be quite overexposed anyway, you can very easily get AI to create any sort of a front view of any building and then just overexpose it, and you can't then tell what it is anyway. So AI in this case is incredibly helpful. So I'm going to add an image to this background, and I'll show you what I do there. Right then, so I've added this image, and you do Shift A and you do Image, and then you just do Mesh Plane. And the image that I created was actually made by ChatGPT. And if I do a preview, it will look something like this. And it will look something like this. Obviously, this is looking quite unrealistic, but we can't actually see this. These hills also are not necessarily going to be 100% accurate, but from what we can actually see through the camera, it actually works quite well. So this is more than enough. So what I did then, I mixed in a mix shader to make it a little bit more white, and then plug that into an emission shader. Now, I don't actually want this to contribute any light to the scene. I just want it to be slightly overexposed. So I go to the object and then object properties, go down to visibility, enable it for camera ray and also transmission ray, because we want to see it through the glass. So now we could just place it quite far away from the scene, because I'm also going to add a tree or something here. So just far enough away. So when I go to camera preview, that it's just going to take up the window view. And then if I do a render preview, we can now see that we have the hills in the background, and that works quite well. So let's say, for example, I had this set to 1. We can see we can see that feels a lot more unrealistic to the scene. I think that it should be brighter. So let's try 10. And I just basically don't want much attention paid to the background. So that for me, I think maybe a value of 10 in this case actually works. Okay, so now what I want to do, I'm just going to add a tree, and then I'm going to add some plants outside here. So the first thing I'm going to do, because how I imagine this in this particular scene is that there's like a hill just here, so we can have a tree there. So I'm going to shift right click here. I'm going to press N. I'm going to go to plants. And then go to trees. And then I'm just going to append this one to the scene. So let's just do a render preview of this section. I'm going to bring that over here. Let's actually go camera view here so we can actually see what's going on. Okay, it's over there. Let's bring it right down here. And let's maybe scale it down a bit. Let's just rotate it until I find something. I want it to be more on the flat side like this. So I can maybe bring it over like that. Right. And I'm always just going to check to make sure that all the colors are working together, making sure that it doesn't feel out of place, because it might do. Okay, I do think maybe this can be a little bit brighter. And maybe we can change the hue a tiny bit. So let me go to on the plant, on the tree. I'm going to click on the leaf, and the color is coming into this one. So we do actually have in this particular tree, we already have this node group set up, so we can change the hue if we wanted to. But that's not going to be in all trees, so I'm just going to show you how to do it. Otherwise, just going to add a hue saturation node, and make sure in most of the tree leaves, there is going to be actually let's remove this one. There's going to be a color going into the diffuse of a principal, and then also a translucent. So any adjustments I'm going to do here, I'm going to make sure it's right in front of the diffuse color. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try 0.48. That will bring it more to the yellow and red. And then I'm going to also desaturate it a little bit and maybe increase the brightness. Okay, let's bring down the saturation a bit more. And that feels better to me. So this was before, and it's going to be quite bold into the scene. Like your eye is immediately being drawn to this different color than the rest of the scene. If I unmute that, it kind of fits a lot better. So it almost looks like it is in the background some more. So that to me is better. So now what I want to do is I'm just going to add a few plants along here, and then some nice shadow on this element. So I'm going to go to plants. I'm going to go to outdoor shrubs and have a bunch here. Let's just append this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Right then. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to imagine that there's some sort of bush area outside here. So what I'm going to do is just put them all roughly into place like so. I'm just going to then, and then I'm just going to click any random one and do Alt D to make a duplicate linked of these so that they don't add to the VRAM, because they can be quite heavy. Something like just really roughly like this. Oh, let's try add a bit more variety. There's this one here and this one here. So let's bring them up ever so slightly. Maybe like that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of them and then I'm going to do F3 and click randomize transform. Randomize transform. And then I'm going to do a randomized rotation by 360 degrees. And then also going to adjust the scale. I'm going to click even scale and then just bring these down. And then this is going to adjust the heights of all of them. So we could try something like this. Maybe something a bit lower like that. I think it's good. Right then, so that's a very, very quick and dirty way to add some plants. Let's just have a look at this. Actually, I'm going to do shade auto smooth on this wall. And I might also turn off harden normals because this is going to be quite a rounded wall anyway. So I do want this to blur in like that. And now I want to add a shadow onto this curtain. So I'm going to do go to iMesh. I'm going to go to effects, and these are where we're going to have some lighting effects. And I want to add this gobo here. So I'm going to add this gobo, which is basically like a black and white mask, or you can have a spotlight. It's basically like it projects this kind of image onto an object, but I'm going to use a plane because we already have lighting in the scene. So I'm then going to go to local view and do render preview. And in this case, I already have it turned off from camera view, but let's turn that back on so we can actually see it. And then I'm going to go edit mode because I only want this one. Do Control R, drag that over there and delete that face. So now we have this gobo, and actually it is animated as well. So if you did want to do an animation, that will work. So then let's go back. Ooh. So then let's go to this view. Let's rotate this like that by 90 degrees. Let's scale it up. And then this is going to cast a shadow onto this curtain. So then let's go to render preview again. Let's actually just solo these items. Actually, what we do need is this building as well, so we can actually see where this starts, and also this wall as well. So there we go. Let's go and do render preview. And now let's bring this up until we can see it on the shadow. Something like that. Maybe bring it down a bit. And this is kind of maybe suggesting there's some other tree there, or maybe this tree is casting that shadow on there. You won't be able to tell the difference, to be honest. I will hide that from the camera view though. And let's bring it over like this. I basically just want to create some nice interest on here, because without it, it's just pure white, which is kind of harsh on the eyes. But some sort of shadows can look pretty good. And there's obviously the hard cut on the side of that. So let's bring this over a little bit. You may need to move this over if you're going to see that edge, of course, but that is going to look great. So then, and then I've got one more item I want to add. That's actually just one more plant. Let's go and just let's just add in this one. And then I'm going to bring that right up to the camera. Right then, to bring it over here like so. And it's actually, do want it to be right next to the camera, but we can't see it because the camera has some clipping. So, and we also have this big back plate as well. So let's bring that behind the plant. And in this case, I want to add the limits so I can actually see if we're going to be outside the building or not. So this is basically showing where the clip starts. So I do want it to be inside still. And now select by collection, and we can scale this up and bring this up maybe. I just want it to be in the corner, something like this. So now with the camera selected, what I want to do is I do want to add some depth of field. I'm going to select the focus object as being the bed. So now the focus plane is going to be here because we enabled limits. We can see this is where the focus plane is, which is going to be in the middle of the bed, which is quite nice. And that means this is going to be out of focus, which it is already. So if I reduce this, this is basically doing a preview for you of what the depth of field is going to look like, which is kind of cool. If you don't have that, you can go to here and enable depth of field. It's just kind of handy, but I will set this to be 5.6, and because that's kind of a standard on a lot of lenses that you might get a 5.6 or something f-stop, and I do want quite a lot of the scene to be in focus, but also the benefit of doing a number which is kind of common means that it will look more similar as a photo as people are kind of used to seeing. So that for me, I believe, is ready to do some rendering. And and then we can start thinking about some post-production. So, okay, so I've made a few changes here, and these are just some final tweaks that I wanted to make before we actually progress, and then I could talk about render settings and things like that. So I've repainted this slightly. What I have done is I've actually painted some more concrete along here. And what you could actually do, this bottom plane, if you were to extrude this up slightly, so it still goes behind the wall, and add some bevel there, this will then blend more into the plaster. So it's like you've plastered the bottom ground, and then some plaster is still on the bottom rock. And also I have tweaked this color amps to be less prominent. I've brought the black back so that we can still get some more details coming in there. That's basically what I've done. And lastly, in this section, what I did do, I also increased the scale of this plaster to 6, because that was because the holes were still just a little bit too big for me. So this worked better. And not only that, on the outside area, I've added a second daybed. You can't actually see it here. It's there because I'm going to show you an outside shot in a second. So now let's talk about some render settings. Okay, first of all, I would set this to be GPU. I have this set to CPU right now because my computer's struggling to render and record this at the same time. So I've just got this set to CPU, and GPU is going to be a lot faster. So let's go down to render settings here. So we have render. I've set this to be 512. We may need more, we may need less, but let's do a test render and see. And we do have path guiding. I'll explain this afterwards, but I'm going to leave that off for now because that's not available with GPU. And then we go down to here. So we have maximum bounces. So if I set this to be 1, we'll be able to see that there's only going to be 1 light bounce into the scene. So every single light is only going to bounce once. And that's going to be very unrealistic. So I can set it to be 0 bounces. So we're only going to be getting direct light at this point. So the higher number you set this, the more light bounces we're getting. So we can also see there's lots of overlapping glass planes here. So we need to add more bounces to allow more light to get through. So there we go. There's now, oh, that's a lot. So there's more and more light getting through. After about 12 to 16, you're going to be starting to get diminishing returns. But I have found that even if you do set it to 32, the render time isn't too much different. And I prefer just to go brute force the maximum amount of bounces as possible. And then I'm not going to be missing anything. So we also have transparent bounces. This is related to how many overlapping transparent planes there are. So in a pampas grass, for example, there's going to be lots and lots of overlapping transparent planes, in which case you might need quite a high value here, but that does slow down render time from what I found. Then we have a clamping indirect and direct. So for the purposes of this render, I'm going to leave this to be 0, and I will show you a comparison setting that to be 10, because there's quite a considerable difference. There's benefits to both, but we may need to play with this a little bit. We have filter glossy. I'll also cover this a little bit later as well. And then we also have dicing rate. So this is related to the subdivisions. Now, because these displacement walls, we've actually set it to be displacement and bump, which means that half of the work is actually being done by the bump map. So I don't suppose you remember, but if you go back to the point at which we made this, I set it to displacement only, and you could see that this whole geometry was being displaced, but there wasn't much detail until I added displacement and bump. So by setting it to displacement and bump, we're getting the geometry actually coming out like this, but not very fine detail, and then the finer details being filled in by the normal map. So by the viewport, this is set to subdivision levels. Every 8 pixels, there's going to be a subdivision. If I set this to be 1, then on every 1 pixel level, that's where there's going to be a subdivision. So you can imagine how many polygons is going to be there in the end if we set this to be 1 pixel width per subdivision. It's going to be tiny subdivisions. Setting it to 8 is going to be like this big. Setting it to be 20 is maybe this big, and you get the idea. So the bigger this number, the less subdivisions there's going to be, and the easier it's going to be to render. So I've set dicing rate for the render to be 4, so a little bit less than the actual render, and that should give just enough subdivisions so there's enough bigger detail to be extruded from the wall. And then the finer details, we're going to be using the bump from this displacement anyway. So let's continue. We've also got simplify. So this is related to your GPU. So we have a lot of textures in this scene. And if I set it to simplify, I'm going to set texture limit to be 2K. That's going to be absolutely perfectly fine. I can even probably get away with 1K for this scene. If there is an image texture which is right next to the camera, and we might see the resolution of that image because it's right next to the camera, then I might have to increase this. but I'm going to try for 2K and just see how they look. If that renders fine, I could also then try 4K. And if that still renders fine, then it's great. But that does considerably add to the VRAM. So Simplify can save your life if you're running out. In some renders, I've even gone down to 512, and it's also been fine because most of the objects have been quite far away from the camera anyway, so you can't tell the difference. Then let's go down. We've got film. I set this to be 1.1. This is related to, this can make your image look sharper. With 1.5 as the default, but setting it to 1.1 means it's quite sharp. If this is way too low, if there's a high contrast area, so a dark bit right next to a bright bit, you might get something called aliasing, where you're going to start to get these jagged edges along the edge, which isn't very nice. So the idea is that you want to have it nice and smooth, quite sharp but smooth, and then you can sharpen it later. Then let's go down. I've got a compositor set to GPU. Then we'll come on to the denoising in a second. And then I think that's fine. Right, now let's talk about view transform, and I'm going to set this to be raw. That looks very, very ugly, but what I'm going to do is, if I go to this button here, I can say that I want the compositor to be visible, let's say always. Try that. And we don't have anything in the compositor right now, so let's adjust that. So I'm going to go to the compositor. And the first thing I want to do is, this looks very, 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 very ugly, but this raw setting has the most amount of data inside it. I used to actually do a lot of the compositing actually in Photoshop, but since 4.4 especially, there's been quite considerable improvements in the compositor speed. So now the compositor is actually getting more and more reasonable for me to actually start working in it, especially how we can do the adjustments in the viewport directly. So the first thing I want to do is I want to type in convert color space. Plug that in there. So I want to go from linear rec 709, which is basically going to be this raw, and then I want to go from that to AGX base sRGB. And now we go. So that's basically the image we had before. So if I mute this and set this back to AGX, it's going to be basically the same style of image. So I believe that goes to base contrast. And then let's turn this back on, set that back to raw. And there we go. So we've gone back to that image. Okay, now the reason why I've added this node is simply because, so the image is baked in with AGX. If I was then to add a RGB curves, and then I want to push that value up, I can make it as bright as I like. So I try to go pure white. AGX is going to be limiting it, so it will never reach pure white. So as an example, if I do this, this is not white because AGX will not allow it to go that bright. So what we can do is we can render it with raw, but now what we can see is that now this has gone to pure white, simply because all the AGX is happening here, and then anything extra is going to allow me to push that image even further than AGX allows it. So let's work on the render passes. So let's go to view layers, and I want to enable mist, denoise data, and I'm also going to enable, for example, glossy indirect. I'm not going to go over these in this tutorial. There's too much stuff to go over. I can enable, for example, material and object crypto matte. And what we can also enable, we've also enabled ambient occlusion. So let's go to the render settings. And if I just type in AO, and we can see AO distance. I'm going to reduce this to be 0.1, so 10 centimeters. And now I think we're good to go. So I've just got it to 1920 by 1920, 512, and we're good to go. Let's go back to the compositor, and then we can add a denoise node. I'm going to set it to be none because that seems to preserve the most amount of detail. And we can see this has slowed down considerably because this denoise node is really bad in the viewport. So let's just disable this. Okay, so this has now finished. So I'm just going to go over to you the compositor that I've got here. It's a little bit wild, but I'll try to explain it. I'm not going to go over all the passes that I have enabled now because we are just running out of time. So I may have to just do a second one to go over this in a little bit more detail. So basically, let me just quickly run through this, and then I can just do a very quick comparison with the clamping indirect and direct. So what we have here is a compositor setup. So what we have firstly is we have the main image going into exposure, so we can increase the brightness of this scene if we wanted to. But I have that turned off. I don't really need that in this case. Then we have it going into a denoise node, which cleans up that up really nicely. And then we have 2 glare nodes, and they go into a color space convert. So then that goes back to the original image. So what the glare does, so the first one here, this one is basically this star kind of pattern, which is really nice, especially on these highlights. And then we also have this glare here, which is just a bloom. So if I preview this, this is just a bloom effect. So both of them together adds a really nice highlight in these brighter areas. And you should always make sure you add glare, because this makes this look much more realistic, especially on these areas and these areas. And then what we've got here is a soft light mix node. So if I add a mix color and I set that to be soft light, what I've done here is we have a gloss indirect, this one here. And this gloss indirect is going into a denoise node because that's also very noisy. And this is basically all the indirect glossy information. So we can see it's very, very glossy. It's just the pure gloss information. Now, if I plug that into a color space convert, the reason why I do that is simply for my own brain, because I'm so used to working in Photoshop and exporting the passes after they've already been converted into Photoshop, then I can do the adjustments. So with the original image and the converted glossy indirect, I can then plug that into a soft light. So the first one is the first image and the second one is the gloss indirect. And what that will do is that will basically create contrast around the glossy areas. So if I increase this, the glossy areas get more prominent. If I mute that, then they go away. So a little bit of this can be quite nice, but not too much, just to add a little bit of highlights in these areas. And it just adds a little bit more detail on them. And then we have the AO pass. I'm simply just going to show you what that is. I'm not going to explain that right now, but it's just a black and white mask. So what you can do is you can plug that into a multiply, and then you can basically bring out the outer edges. So you basically just duplicate one of these, set that to be multiply, and then plug that one into here. And then you get some nice edges, but that is not realistic. You can use it in some cases where it does help to bring out some of these edges. Maybe they're just not quite dark enough, and that will work. And then what I've got here is a crypto matte. So we have enabled the crypto matte options. And then we have the crypto matte. Basically, you just plug in the image here. I click on the plus, and then I can choose any object from the scene. And in this case, I've just selected the bed. So if I check out the matter here, that's basically the mask for just the bed. And what I've actually done is, if I preview this mix node, so what I've got in is the image going into this mix, this image going into an exposure, then to this mix, then I'm using this matter as the mask. So if I now increase this, we're going to increase the brightness of just the bed. So if I go back, so 0.25, the bed looks natural here. It looks nice and bright, but with it turned off, I felt like this bed area was maybe just a little bit too dark. And actually, I find this actually looks more realistic like this. So by using a crypto matte to create the mask, I was able to dynamically change only the bed how I wanted it to be. I then have that going into another exposure, which just to increase the overall brightness just a smidge. And then this one is muted. Let's unmute this one. That will just take away some of these, some of the saturation in some of these colors. And then for this one, what I've done is I've pushed the gamma slightly into the blue. So if I preview this one, if I unmute this, we can see it goes more yellow and orange. If I unmute it, it goes slightly more into the blue. But this is maybe too much, so I'm probably just going to remove this completely. And then on top of that, I just have a little bit of sharpen just to pull out some of these edges. And that looks good. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about, and that's the clamping. So this one has had the clamping turned off. So if I turn off the denoiser, you can see loads and loads of fireflies all over the place. If I go to the other shot, this one was rendered with clamping set to 15. And we can see that it's a lot cleaner. So if I go between the two, we can see there's a huge difference here. However, the denoiser has done quite an incredible job at cleaning that up. So if I go to the other one, and there we go. So the comparison between the two, firstly, the denoiser has done such an incredible job, but if I look at the clamping, we can see how much of the highlights have been removed. So we can see here, we've lost this really nice glare here, and we can see all the overexposed areas over here have been removed. We can see there's also the front of this, which has been, the highlights have been taken away. And in general, there's been a lot of highlights that have just been removed from the scene simply by using clamping. But like I mentioned, if I remove the denoiser, we can see how much work the denoiser is having to do. Now, for a still image, even though this is so incredibly noisy, the denoiser cleans that right up. It's so actually quite incredible how well that works. And for a still image, I'd be happy with this. I'd be happy to publish this, and nobody would ever know. We have so much detail here. We can still see all the rug. We can still see all the creases. Even though I have no idea where the information has come from, we can still get all the information back just by using the denoise node. Now, why would I use clamping? Now, in most cases, the point at which this becomes a problem would be for animations. So we can see that the denoiser in this case is doing a lot of work to remove all the fireflies. And in some cases, it's probably going to be making up some of this detail where it thinks the wrinkles should be. But simply because it's so noisy, when I go to the next frame, the way in which the denoiser will try to fill in the blanks might be different from the frame before. And in that case, from frame to frame to frame to frame, we can start seeing some artifacting happening where the denoiser is going to be quite fuzzy for an animation. But for the clamped version, it's going to clean up a lot easier. Now, this is quite a noisy scene and probably have to use more samples anyway. This is quite an extreme example. Oh yeah, we've also lost the highlights on this class here. So if you're using an animation, that's probably when I'd be using some clamping here, because we've lost so much detail, so many of the lovely highlights. And by default, this is set to 10, which means that the clamping effect is going to be even stronger. So I always try to render without clamping, especially for a still image. If you have an animation, then in that case, I'd probably just stick with the clamping and just see how it works. Of course, first, I'd probably try increasing the samples if I have the time. Okay, so as I mentioned about the caustics with the pool, so let's talk about that now. So I have actually tweaked some of the values a little bit. I've also added another daybed there. And this is the outside scene. So this looks really nice. So as I mentioned before with the caustics, there was actually a way to get some beautiful caustics out and also have a volume. And that is caustics coming straight out of the box with cycles. So the first thing we can do is we go down to caustics and we have filter glossy. This is saying it's blurring the caustics. And that is also because if we have it set to 0, it's going to be a lot more noisy and you're going to have some problems. But if I set it to 0, we can start to see, we'll be able to see around here, we'll be able to see some caustics or some highlights appearing where the GPU is trying its best to show some sort of caustics, but it really won't be able to make a very good job of it. So let's just wait a second and let's see what this looks like in a couple of minutes. I've got this set to sample count 4096 just to let it run. And we can leave that going. So we can already see some highlights actually appearing here. We've got this little streak here, which looks like it could be some pooled caustics, but it's not quite right. Let's just leave it running a little bit longer. Let's let it go to 1024. Okay, and this is the effect. So that's probably best you're going to get. However, inside of Blender, if you switch it to CPU, and I do have a 32 core CPU, so this does help a little bit, we'll start getting a very similar effect to the GPU. But if I enable path guiding, wait a second here, because we're going to start to see some magic happening in this scene. Okay, and here we go. So here is some beautiful caustics appearing just naturally, just straight out of cycles without doing anything except for enabling path guiding and turning on filter glossy. We don't need to set something to be the caustics emitter, caustics receiver, and caustics caster. It's just straight out of the box. And we also have some volume going on here. So we get the colors getting darker as it goes down. And we have some really beautiful caustics appearing here. So this is probably some of the most beautiful water you're ever going to get out of cycles. And this just looks so nice and so natural that I'd highly recommend that you give this a try. Of course, this is CPU based, so you're going to have to rely on the CPU and the CPU speed, which is going to be a lot less. But if you have the time and you have a really beautiful scene that you need to do for a customer, and you really want to show this off, then this is something you can do. There's not really many people that talk about this. Maybe it's just because it's locked off to CPU, that it's just too slow for a lot of people. But please do give this a try. So this doesn't just work for pool caustics, it works for anything. So if you have a glass in the scene, make sure if you're using a special node setup, just make sure that you just have straight away just normal glass, so there's no shadow removed, anything, and you should then get some really beautiful caustics on all the glass and all the metal and everything else in the scene. It will look a lot more realistic and natural. Yeah, that's probably that for this scene. All right, and if you made it this far, congratulations on completing this masterclass. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you've learned a lot of tips and tricks. I hope that you, at the very least, it gave you some ideas to bring forward into your own work or your own projects or something like that. So thank you very much for watching. If you guys want to know anything more, then please do reach out to me, and I'll see if I can get back to everybody. And check out iMesh, of course. Maybe you're looking to renovate your own house, or maybe start your own career. There's a million different possibilities. So $17, it couldn't be a better time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.